There is one experiment known as Theresa, who walks around the outer portion of Undercity and is kind of out of place, seeing as it's one of the few humans that walks around unabated, with a blindfold on, mind you. She has the title of Gerard's Mind Slave, so it's pretty obvious based on some context clues why she's allowed to walk around without problems. Basically, Theresa is the result of an experiment with Gerard Abernathy, who removed parts of her brain and stimulated other parts of her body. That way, he'd have the perfect worker who's basically used to transport items between him and Father Lancaster. She's also able to use gutter speak, the language for the undead race. The character's most likely a reference to Theresa from the Fabled series, who is known as a blind seer, although there aren't much similarities between the two characters, other than the fact that they both have the same name and wear a blindfold. If you also head over to the Alchemist District, you'll see a couple of live Alliance subjects being tested on, where they routinely feed them new potions that turn them into all sorts of different animals, before exploding after being turned into a sheep. This again is supposed to be a reference to Warcraft 3, where clicking on a sheep repeatedly would cause them to explode. Although ignoring the context of the lighthearted reference, taking both of these things at face value makes it seem a lot darker than it was probably intended to be. You have a literal mind slave who was lobotomized walking around Undercity as a delivery person. Then you have live human experimentation going on downstairs where they're not even really trying to hide it, right next to the mutilated corpse of a male orc. And at number 9, we have the Secrets of Frog Island. Located off the coast of the Krasarang Wilds is a small little island which doesn't have any important NPCs or quests associated to it. And if you go up to the island, you'll see a whole bunch of warning signs on the coast, which simply has the image of a frog upside down in water. You can't click on the signs or anything, so it doesn't really give you any indication of what the warnings are for. And if you go into the island, you'll just see a whole bunch of frog critters, running around in groups of 4 as well as hanging out on the various protruding rocks. All in all, there are over 75 frog critters at any one time on the island, and they even have a pretty fast respawn rate. It seems like the perfect place to get the achievement Critter Kill Squad, an achievement for killing 50,000 critters with your guild, or one of the other personal achievements awarded for killing large numbers of critters. Although, the signs posted along the coast of the island were put there for a reason. If you spend too much time killing the frog critters, then you'll spawn the boss of the island, known as Croacon, who hops out of the ocean and just goes into the middle of the island, where he casts a single spell known as Frog Justice. This ability has a 100-yard range, hits everything regardless of line of sight, can never miss, and instantly kills any players who are affected by the ability. The frog itself is also immune to all damage and effects, including Mind Vision, a priest ability which has absolutely zero negative effects to the targets it's cast on. After he casts this one ability, then it just hops back into the ocean just as quick as it came. And at number 8, we have the Hidden Stories of Gadget Xan. In the deserts of Tanaris, there are a couple of tracks that lead out of Gadget Xan, and if you follow the tracks of any of them, they all lead to the gruesome deaths of whoever created those tracks. The first pair of tracks seems to be a group of people with a pack animal, and as they continue into the desert, it appears as if a fight broke out, where 3 of them die in whatever caused the altercation. Then one of the other adventurers continues on with their animal, only for the animal to die halfway along the journey, and the adventurer continues quite a ways into the desert, slowly losing some of his equipment as he gets further and further in. First losing his axe, then his shield, before finally collapsing and not being able to continue any further. Perhaps dying of exposure or to one of the many predator animals or thieves located in the desert. There is also another track leading out from Gadget Xan, this one not as long. It simply depicts a group heading out into the desert and then deciding pretty quickly that they want to turn back, although they don't quite make it and die on the return trip. Most likely, whatever they ran into scared them enough to try to run back, although they didn't run very far before succumbing to whatever got them. And if you explore deeper into Tanaris, you'll even see an abandoned camp. Well, not really abandoned, as you can see the bodies of the previous occupants, as well as a couple of grave markers, which could indicate that a group got stuck in the middle of the desert, and they were probably there for a while, with some of them dying due to a lack of supplies or exposure, and the surviving members buried them and gave them grave markers, only for the rest of the party to eventually die as well, without receiving a proper burial. And at number 7, we have the Hidden Eyes of Darkshire in the Tirisful Glades. This little secret is just a nice little bit of creepy ambiance to these two zones, where when you're walking along a path, you might notice some yellow eyes staring back at you from the bushes. But if you were to investigate, you'd see that there was nothing there. The zones themselves are supposed to be creepy on their own, so there's most likely not much more to the story about these eyes, other than just setting the mood. Although it is a pretty nice mood setter to look out for when you're questing through these two zones. And at number 6, we have a very well-known creepy Easter egg in WoW, known as the Kazan Crips. This is quite a famous piece of in-game information, where located in a blocked-off part of Kazan is a crypt, with a whole bunch of bones and skeletons, potential graves, and of course, an underwater section with people hanging upside down. For the longest time, WoW players speculated what exactly the crypts were put into the game for, and in Legion, players were allowed to go down there for the first time, for a few artifact and other types of quest chains involving Kazan. But it wasn't until 2018, when we got the WoW Diary book, that we finally got some concrete information on why the crypts were put into the game. Like many of the mysteries in WoW, there was a pretty simple explanation. You see, Kazan was the first ever raid they designed in the game, and after they submitted the rough draft for it, they were told to make it even bigger, but weren't exactly given parameters on what that meant. So, they went to making Kazan gigantic, with multiple levels and even a secret side underground level called the Hidden Wine Cellar and the Undead Catacombs. Although when they submitted this new design, they were told it was too big and to cut back. So they removed the wine cellar and undead catacombs and then redesigned the rest of the tower, which didn't actually make it into the game until the Burning Crusade expansion, despite the fact that it was the first ever raid that was worked on in the game's history. So the actual mystery behind the crypts was they were just cut for being too big, and they were meant to be part of the raid in some way, but since they completely redesigned the entire tower, and the crypts were cut before the redesign of the main raid, it just kind of got left in by mistake, and then blocked off so that no one could go down there, except for the few people who found ways to teleport behind the invisible door. And at number 5, we have the Arenus of the Darkmoon Fair. Located in a secret cave underneath a shipwreck off the coast of the Darkmoon Isle, you'll come into a room full of Blood Elf NPCs, who are all named Arenus. The NPCs don't really do anything, but are aggressive if you get too close to them, and the only other thing in the cave is a giant metal device towards the back of the room. One would assume these are a whole bunch of demons or something similar, but their actual origins are probably a little bit more sinister. If you kill one of the Arenus, they'll drop an item called the Ring of Broken Promises, which starts a quest that simply requires you to turn it in to the Darkmoon Fair denizen named Chester. Upon completing the quest, Chester will say, "Ah, I see you found my lovelies. Beautiful, aren't they? It's a shame the process drives them so insane. The ring is yours to keep, of course. Can you hear them whisper? Marvelous." You'll then be given a toy item called the Ring of Broken Promises, which allows your character to transform into one of the Blood Elf Arenus. So one can assume that Chester created these girls through whatever machine is in the same room as them, but we have no idea why he did it or what he did to them. If we go based on more of the name of Arenus, in Greek mythology they were a pair of 3 sisters in the underworld who punished people specifically that committed the crime of killing their parents. And in one famous story, they drove a person named Arthus insane after he killed his mother because she killed his father. Although they don't care about context or how or why it happened, and punished him severely for it anyway. They can also be summoned by someone who swore vengeance on someone else, and would punish them while ignoring mitigating factors, which made them very feared in Greek mythology. In D&D, the Arenus are beautiful devils who are basically fallen angels, and carry out the rules of their masters. In some versions of Greek mythology, they're supposed to be very beautiful creatures as well, and that's especially true in their D&D counterparts, which would probably be why the ones in Warcraft are modeled after Blood Elves, as that's generally considered the most beautiful female race in the game at the time they were added, since this was all added to the game in Warlords of Draenor. Although why they went insane isn't really explained from their roots, and is most likely just directly involved with Chester turning them into whatever they are. Most likely twisting different humanoid creatures into the beings that become the Arenus, and the fact that they look like Blood Elves isn't really indicative of what their original race might once have been. They were just twisted and corrupted into this new form for Chester's pleasure. And at number 4, we have the Dungeon of Scholomance. The story behind how this dungeon became an undead-infested dark dungeon has got to be one of the darkest in all of World of Warcraft's lore. It starts off as a normal mansion to a rich family of the Baravs, who wanted to enjoy their wealth for eternity, and sold off their people to the Cult of the Damned in Kel'Thuzad. The transformation of the Manor to the dungeon is best explained through the quest chain known as the Butcher, told from the perspective of 2 of the servants who died in the dungeon. Over time, they knew the new occupants were not good news, and decided to hide in one of the many rooms in the mansion, only coming out at night in order to steal necessities to live. Every day, they would hear screams as people were being tortured upstairs for unknown reasons, until after 6 months they were eventually found. And, to quote part of the quest chain, "The undead surrounded us, constantly tormenting us with horrific acts of depravity. Finally, he came. He introduced himself as Dr. Thein Kenoff. We came to know him as the Butcher. We finally understood what the screams were from. The Butcher exposed us to pain that we did not know existed. He used us in countless experiments to devise a plague. The days turned to weeks. We would have died on the first day, had it not been for the cruel bastard keeping us alive through magical means. We feel nothing. Our souls remain here, in limbo. We are unable to leave until our remains are found, and spirits laid to rest." For a place literally used for live human experimentation, it's quite ironic that Hearthstone decided to turn it into a funny Hogwarts knockoff for one of their Hearthstone expansions, which I can't help but feel was entirely meant as a joke, based on how dark the origins of Scholomance really are. And at number 3, we have the secret of the horrific visions. If you actually take time to explore some parts of the horrific visions, you'll notice a couple of creepy little Easter eggs which are very appropriate for a video like this. If during the Stormwind portion you decide to try to go into the Stormwind Keep, Wrathion will stop you and tell you this is one vision that he doesn't want to know the outcome of, implying that he doesn't want to see what cruel fate had in store for Anduin. Also in Stormwind, you'll notice a couple of apples on the floor in places, and if you decide to kick into the apples, it will grow spider legs and scurry back to its original location. Each time you kick the apple, it gives you a 1% chance to obtain a toy, so if you kick it 100 times, you'll get a guaranteed drop at the end of the vision. And also, in the Orgrimmar version, located in one of the many cages throughout the city, you'll be able to find a very familiar person locked up, as you can find an exact duplicate of your character locked inside one of these cages, cowering and crying. Although, probably one of the more disturbing secrets is again located in Stormwind. When leaving the Cathedral District to the south, you'll see a cat named Tiddles who will whisper you, asking you to kill a nearby rat, because he's just so hungry. If you attack the rat, it will yell, "Have mercy," and if you end up killing it, it will transform into a human, which Tiddles will then start to eat the corpse of. And at number 2, we have the Sludge Field zone in the Hillsbrad foothills. This was a little questing hub, where players were sent in to investigate Warden Stillwater, since he had stopped sending reports back to the Forsaken, and one of the supervisors sent to look in on the Sludge Fields went missing. Based on journal entries from one of the undeads you kill in the zone, we get a pretty good idea of what was going on in the Sludge Fields. Day 25. They incinerated our farms and made us watch. Construction begins tomorrow. Day 40. Construction on their plantation is nearly complete. This place resembles no farm or plantation that I've ever seen. Day 41. The warden of the plantation, Stillwater, arrived today. He lined all of us up and gave us medical examinations. Nobody knows what's going on. Day 45. We've started laboring in the Sludge Fields. They grow poisonous mushrooms in fetid water and muck. Day 50. I hear screams coming from the warden's manor. People are starting to disappear. Day 52. I overheard that some guards talking about the farmers, Ray, Getz, and Kalaba. Something terrible has happened to them. Of this I am certain. Day 60. Those of us that remain are scared for our lives. Some of the farmers claim to have seen ghouls running amok at night. Day 61. A strange turn of events today. A master apothecary from Terran Mill arrived. From a little information I'm able to gather, he is here to supervise the operations. Lydon is his name. Day 62. Master Apothecary Lydon was dragged away by Stillwater's guards. He was yelling and screaming that the Dark Lady would have Stillwater's head for this. What is he talking about, I wonder? Day 63. I saw them take away Burnside and Varrington last night. I can only assume that I'm next. The rest of the journal is full of incoherent scribbles. Basically, what was happening here was Stillwater was experimenting on Forsaken and humans in order to bind them to his will and make them undead slaves. Something the undead were still openly against at this time period. Although even the undead didn't really care what was going on to the human prisoners. During one of the quests for the zone, you're told to dig out some of the planted humans in the ground, and told to do the right thing. When you are given the option to either unbury them, or smash their heads in order to kill them, since their fate was basically to be turned into mindless ghouls anyway. It's one of the few quests in the game that allows you to pick the good or evil option. And if you pick the evil option, there will be an extra little dialogue for you that says, you might want to rethink your definition of right. And at number 1, we're going to have a little bit of story time to tell the story of a vanilla WoW quest chain known as the Legend of Stalon, which is a quest chain all about uncovering the story of an undead named Stalon Mistmantle. So, rather than retell the story of the quest chain, we will instead be going over the story itself, as it's an excellent piece of dark writing added to the game, which tells the story of a madman teacher who was a little bit too infatuated with one of his students. His story begins with a letter to one of his teachers. To the Honorable Headmaster Krillian, my former master, I write to you so that you might know what your apprentice has been doing of late. Paying heed to your advice, I sought to build my knowledge and wisdom through travel outside the gates of our beloved Stormwind. My journeys took me to many places, but I have decided to take up residence here in the lovely town of Moonbrook. The surrounding fields of Westfall are most beautiful as the harvest approaches. Within just a few days of my visit, I found myself tutoring the local children from the nearby farmlands. The lessons went so well that the town mayor commissioned me to run a school, and construction has begun on a new schoolhouse. From Silverpine to Stormwind, and now Moonbrook. Who would have guessed I would see so much of Azeroth? Warm regards, Stalon Mistmantle. Now, it's interesting to note about all of these letters is that none of them were actually sent. And during the quest chain, you piece together all of these notes and letters that were found throughout different parts of Azeroth. Now, the first one details his life in Moonbrook, which did not end well for him, as the whole zone was razed by the orcs during the First War, and then was overtaken by the Defies Brotherhood after the rebuilding of Stormwind. So it seems as if Stalon would have had a bright future ahead of him if it wasn't for the First War happening. His next letter is addressed to a nobleman, asking for a job to tutor his children. One assumes how he was able to obtain the job, seeing as the letter was never sent. But he probably just met him in person instead, or simply sent another letter. Dear noble sir, word of your need for a tutor for your children has traveled to me here in Goldshire, where I take up temporary residence in the Lion's Pride Inn. Due to the unfortunate state of events in the region, I was forced to abandon my post as headmaster of Moonbrook Schoolhouse. Please accept my application to serve as tutor for your offspring. Headmaster Krillian of the Academy can speak to you of my abilities if necessary. I shall travel to meet you in person when the winter rains subside and the roads are suitable for travel once again. Until then, Stilvan Mistmantle of Silverpine. In his next letter, he simply goes over the details of his job as a tutor to a noble family, and talks about 2 of his students. Giles, the boy, seems a bit rambunctious and will be a challenge to educate. However, the elder daughter, Tilua, seems exceptionally smart. I couldn't help but notice her captivating beauty as well. She is on the cusp of womanhood now. Supposedly, the Lord has arranged her marriage for next year. But I digress. This week I will accompany the family to their summer cottage near the Estavel lodging camp in Elwyn, close to the Redwidge Mountains. I hope to write more while there. It is here that we are introduced to Tilua. Stilvan seems normal at first, but as the letters continue, you can see that his infatuation grows and grows, based on the most mundane actions on Tilua's part, which he just took to the extremes as a sign of affection for him. Most strange and uncontrollable feelings. Never have I felt the way I did today. Whilst assisting Giles with his history lesson, Tilua was outside tending to the flower garden. After a few minutes, she came inside and placed a scarlet begonia in my open palm and smiled at me in such a way that my heart felt as though it was trembling within my chest. He has another letter which continues, most certain that she shares the same feelings for me now. She even placed her hand on mine this morning. When she smiles, her eyes light up like glittering diamonds. Unspoken words pass between us. I can feel her in my pounding heart and heated veins. This letter almost reads stalkerish in a way. He takes very innocent gestures as a sign of affection, and even admits that they haven't really talked very much, but asserts that there is an unspoken bond. They have conversations which don't need words because their feelings are getting across to each other, and this one-sided affection doesn't end well for him. Anger and fury, the likes of which I never knew existed. How dare she? As I was instructing Giles in the meaning of numbers, Tilua appeared before me with a suitor, holding hands in public nonetheless. What an uncouth young man. Rather than introduce me properly, Tilua simply said, "Oh, that's just my tutor, Uncle Stilvan. He's a nice old man." Old? At that word, my cheeks flushed with heat. I am but a few years older, and yet she betrays. It's important to note that at this point the family was actually traveling, most likely going to the home of the suitor, or for any number of reasons. Because they were on the road, no one was able to find out about what happened next. Downward spiral of despair. First she mocks me, and now she is engaged. The ungracious charlatan was pretending to love when truly she desired to hurt me all along. A black void lurks within me now, and it grows with each waking moment. The blood I shall spill pales in comparison to the tears I have shed. After this last letter, Stilvan murders both Tilua and her suitor, as well as the rest of the entire family. And no one knew who killed the traveling nobles for the longest time, until the player character doing this quest chain uncovers all these journal entries and pieces together a motive after all these years. After piecing together the final puzzle piece, you'll be told to visit Stilvan in Darkshire and put an end to the psychopath. They did update the quest with a cataclysm, but it's nowhere near as good as the classic version, which is why we will end this video off by only talking about the vanilla WoW version of this quest chain. The whole story is so different from everything else Blizzard puts in their games. It's not as creepy or as unsettling as probably some of the other stuff I talked about. Simply the story of a delusional psychopath who took everything the wrong way, and in a murderous rage killed an entire family. When really, he wasn't even mocked. He just had a warped view on reality. Maldraxxus is the most powerful of the Shadowlands realms and acts as their main military force against possible intruders. Because of this, they accept a fair few people ranging from everything between not good enough for Bastion and not bad enough for Revendreth. The only thing they really look out specifically for is willpower, and the very zone itself tests that willpower. The zone itself rots to the very core. This realm is the origin of all things undeath and necromancy, and the Scourge we all know so well. This is the origin, and the very land itself oozes of carrion. So much so you can find warts coming from the ground, acting as gathering nodes for skinners. Maldraxxus divides itself into multiple houses, one of 5 houses, each with their own specialty to assist in the wars. When we the players arrive, 2 of them have already been destroyed. Between where those houses stand, you can commonly find animals wandering the land, a mix of twisted bones, rotted, mutilated flesh, and a natural sinew stitching holding them all together. To the north, a land of spores, massive spider-like swellings of fungus towering above everything, eventually growing large enough to move on their own and lumbering through the lands, attacking anything they come into contact with, adding to their biomass. First, we start with the House of Plagues, the most devastated of the 2 destroyed houses. On Azeroth, we have seen the devastation of the Plague, but here in the House of Plagues, we see the next level of horrors. It was once the origin of the weapons used by both Sylvanas and the Scourge, but now it lays in ruins. Its people vaporize in an instant in a freak explosion, leaving nothing but maddening amalgamations of slime and bones, most left mindless and others left insane by the many different souls now melded together into bigger beings. Some even melded together a few hundred into gargantuan beasts of pure destruction. Once the house charged with building advanced weaponry to assist Maldraxxus in defending the realms of death, now left in literal shambles of agonizing horror, a literal ocean of plague. Next is the House of Constructs, once designated to create bodies for souls who had lost their natural forms, now creates the most horrifying creation. Beasts with broken bodies and painful appendages, they now capture and torture anyone they deem unworthy, be it Maldraxian or those from other realms. Still alive, they toss them into the flesh pits to await. Then, like building blocks, they pick and choose body parts, limbs, eyes, organs, whatever are needed, and are taken from the barely living and then used for their creations, commonly leaving souls torn in shreds separated between many constructs. And the obvious, constructs being made of many different souls all shoved together into a mess of permanent anguish. Even worse if they are deemed not useful, they are thrown into the meat grinder, where their bodies are ground into raw flesh to be used for, you guessed it, more abominations, beginning the cycle of madness once again. The other destroyed house was the House of Eyes, Spies, and Soldiers of Shadows. These Maldraxians were tasked with typical espionage. Through sneaking and sabotage, they would find information needed to defend their realms, while also sabotaging any attempts that they could. Filled with Nerubian-like creatures, the house now lays in ruins, although some still remain of its members. Next is the House of the Chosen, the house you're recruited into at the start of your adventure. This house is filled with warriors, the main brute force of Maldraxxus. The things here are trained in combat, and also build the armor and weapons needed to arm them. Made of metal, bone, animal hide, and even the scraps of land boils, blisters, and warts, to make some of the best armor and rune blades the land can muster. With the realm's leader, the Primus, seemingly missing, it has left the Malgraves to their own ideals, and as time passes, and the anima runs dry, it leads many to lesser ways, like mentioned with the House of Constructs. But what of the final house that we'll speak of today? That is the House of Rituals. The House of Rituals, filled with the best of the best, spellcasters and alkalites, and of course, liches. I'm sure in saying the word lich has many of you in the idea that there should be some issues with this house, and how many horrors can befall the land. Sanctioned in a section turned white with a mix of spores and bone dust, they perform rituals of unspeakable power. Of course, needing ingredients some may call undignified, and so it is common to find animals and expired servants here, harvested for spell component cantrips. But the horrors of the House of Rituals is not the physical, but the metaphysical, with the insane magics they practice there, including necromancy, which in a realm like Maldraxxus is quite powerful. The entire zone shows its disgusting and disturbing nature on its sleeve, filled to the brim with death, even to the point that it is common for the skies to be filled with the wailing souls in a soul storm, as what we would call normal weather does not exist in the Shadowlands. And for the bloodthirsty undead to host massive bloodbath gladiatorial matches composed of thousands of individuals fighting till only one house remains. One of these matches even acting as the entry to the zone itself, and another being the entire premise for one of the dungeons. An infinite army of undead charged with defending the realm have fallen, turned them into an even more horrifying version of the Scourge we see on Azeroth. For here, they are the very origin of undeath might. Although there is some good within this land of blight and pus, as there are some unlikely allies, ranging from abominations, liches, skeletons, and bone wardens reminiscent of Lord Marogar. Massive spider-like bones curled around buildings of purple with trims of gold, and of course the necropolises, flying structures of dominance, ventured into a few destroyed and left in ruins by the destruction of the House of Eyes and Plague. Even the structures here are not free of the land's theme of undeath, Maldraxxus seemingly having an Erubian-style building which was shared with the Warcraft Scourge. However, the World of Warcraft Scourge, or at least the Scourge of Icecrown, seemed to go more into the Maw's theme of architecture. Many zones in the past have touched one side of death, but no one zone has touched on such the gruesomeness of death and all of its outcomes as Maldraxxus. From plagues and blights vaporizing entire civilizations, into walking amalgamations of bone and goo, to fields of spores infesting and enslaving their hosts, to still live corpses being dragged into piles and salvaged for parts to create constructs of flesh and soul, to the very liches commanding this all and treating all of this as nothing more than a common day of necromancy. Maldraxxus hits the most gruesome outcomes of death and necromancy to its peaks, while also still somehow finding a way to fester and honor within its boils and blisters of carrion. Maldraxxus is a celebration of all things spooky, and acts as an amazing zone to complement the most basic version of death we have to use, rotting flesh and decrepit bone. Even the Maw is a zone made to be the literal worst of the worst in the afterlife, but leaves itself far less disgusting, vile, and spooky than that of Maldraxxus. And to finish off, what is Halloween? A holiday about fear and horror, but also with a bit of joy in there. Just a bit, which in a way makes the horror all the better. And that fits Maldraxxus perfectly. The zone is filled with horror, rot, death, and gloom, but within it holds small moments of joy and happiness. Some time away from the despair, only to dump you right back into it face first. The Sunken Temple is a place where trolls tried to bring Hakar the Blood God back into the world. But the green dragons found out about it, and sunk the temple in the middle of the swamp to try and put a stop to it. But that actually only allowed them to work without being disturbed, as the green dragons also guarded the place so no one could leave or enter. Eventually, the trolls managed to get a few green dragons to sacrifice, and brought about the avatar of Hakar. What's creepy about this place is that it's an underground temple in the middle of a swamp that is used literally just to sacrifice people and dragons to a blood god. Number 9. The Evergrowth and Yalnu. Now, this one needs a little bit of explaining, seeing as it's a green centaur from a dungeon full of plant monsters. You see, the Evergrowth is an incredibly dangerous force on Draenor that nearly destroyed the planet before the Titan Agrimar came to the planet and created the Gron to keep the plant life in check. The human mages, unknowing of the true danger the Evergrowth posed, attempted to set up portal ways in the middle of the Everbloom to give them more strategic portals into Draenor for the war against the Iron Horde. But the Evergrowth has a pollen that can take control of the minds of humanoid creatures, and eventually warp them into hybrid plant monsters, similar to the Undead Curse. And a huge group of mages get mind-controlled by the Evergrowth and help in raising a Genosaur named Yalnu, and opened a portal for it leading directly to Stormwind. Genosaurs in Evergrowth are the top dogs, and basically demigods like Cenarius. They are so incredibly powerful it would take an army to stop a single one. Luckily, there are almost none left on the planet, except for the one that steps through the portal into Stormwind. If not stopped, it could have easily started mind-controlling civilians and started an invasion similar to the Scourge. But it was stopped, and that was the end of it. The Evergrowth were such an incredibly huge potential threat that it's almost a shame Blizzard did nothing else with it outside of this one dungeon. Number 8. Feted the Devour. This boss was created by Titans experimenting on several Loas and G'huun's corruption to reanimate expired tissues. But the experiments didn't go well, so the Keepers just destroyed all of the samples. But they didn't do a very good job, and G'huun was able to reanimate all of the destroyed specimens from the experiments into one giant chimera known as Feted the Devourer. So it's literally just an amalgamation of dead Loas and animals held together by old god corruption. And it's kind of messed up that the Keepers were even doing horrible experiments like this in the first place, if you really stop to think about it. Number 7. The Reliquary of Souls. In the Burning Crusade, people didn't really know why Illidan had a chamber full of suffering souls in the Black Temple, but since he was a bad guy at the time and it was a raid, it wasn't too hard to think of a reason for it, even if nothing was really explained officially in-game. Then, when the Illidan novel came out, many years later, you learn that Illidan used souls to power a lot of the portals he used to fight the Legion, and went to Occamdoom to collect all of the Draenei souls to power a potential portal to Argus. He also just killed lots of people and took their souls for later use. So the Reliquary of Souls is literally just a place that Illidan kept all of his souls, like a battery that he could then come back and use later. Number 6. Gore Fiend. Speaking of souls, Gore Fiend is a warlock who ate so many Draenei souls that he turned into a bloated abomination. During his fight, he spits out souls and even tries to eat yours, and you have to fight your way out of his stomach. Even if you die from other means in the fight, he'll steal your soul, and you'll end up in his stomach, instead of staying dead. Number 5. Rawl the Gluttonous. This boss in the Waycrest Manor is like a pig monster thing that feeds players parts of his flesh as part of his fight, and also has a phase where he calls servants to feed him, but instead of taking the food he just eats the servants themselves to restore his health. Honestly, not too much lore on this guy. His dungeon journal basically says he was the main chef for the Waycrests, and then since they are pretty messed up people, they probably just did some kind of witch magic on him to turn him into a creepy monster. This boss looks straight out of a horror movie, and has abilities and mechanics that just make him even more creepy, giving him a perfect spot on this list. Number 4. The Old Gods, specifically Yogg-Saron, Cthulhu, and G'huun. Rather than let them take 3 separate spots on the list, I thought to instead combine them all into one, as I'm sure most people would expect them to make the list anyway. Yogg-Saron's fight takes place at the bottom of a Titan research facility, and half the fight is about trying to not go insane from just looking at him.
Look upon the true face of death, and know that your end comes soon.
Cthulhu, in a very similar vein, is constantly whispering things to you and has a phase where he eats you, and you have to try to not be dissolved by his stomach acid.
Your friends will abandon you.
And G'huun, the newest bad boy on the market, looks like a giant parasite stuck in the wall until it bursts out like a slug, and has one of the creepiest character models to date.
Your species exists to feed my growth.
I think of all of the old gods, G'huun is definitely the creepiest looking, but all 3 old gods easily make the list anyway.
You will die.
Number 3. The Escape from Arthus. In the final fight in the Halls of Reflection dungeon, Jaina or Sylvanas fails in killing the Lich King, and you have no chance at beating him. So the only course of action is to literally just run away as fast as possible. But the Lich King gives chase, and sends up ice walls to block your path, and his minions to slow you down, all while he just slowly walks towards you. While Sylvanas works at breaking the ice wall, you're left to kill the minions, and if you're not quick enough, the Lich King will catch up and instantly kill you. This fight is great from a thematic point of view. You're facing down an entity so powerful that all you can do is run away, and even that is proving to be difficult. And unlike other timed encounters, you can actually see the countdown walking towards you. This fight isn't really creepy in the traditional sense of the word, and could be better described as ominous. It's a very well pulled off feeling that can legitimately scare and pressure you as you try to kill the ads as quickly as possible, and I think that gives it a high spot on this list. Number 2, Dr. Thein Kenoff, the Butcher of Skulloments. Now, technically, this guy wasn't a boss, and more of a rare elite inside the dungeon, but I don't think that matters too much. You see, the Butcher was involved in a quest in Vanilla WoW, where you needed to kill him and then burn the body parts of the 2 ghosts outside so that they could pass on in peace. The undead surrounded us, constantly tormenting us with horrifying acts of depravity. Finally, he came. He introduced himself as Dr. Thein Kenoff. We came to know him as the Butcher. We finally understood what the screams were from. The Butcher exposed us to pain that we did not know existed. He used us in countless experiments to devise a plague. The days turned to weeks. We would have died on the first day had it not been for the cruel bastard keeping us alive through magical means. We feel nothing. Our souls remain here, in limbo. We are unable to leave until our remains are found and spirits laid to rest. Now, if you don't know the lore of Skulloments, basically it was a place owned by the Barov family, and they sold it off to a necromancer in exchange for a promise of immortality. And the necromancer just turned it into a school for other necromancers, where they performed all kinds of terrible experiments on the people of the nearby town. And that's why it's the only town in-game with exclusively ghostly residents, and Dr. Thein was the main torturer. And now, number 1, Thaddius. Thaddius is a flesh golem created by using the flesh of women and children captured by the Scourge war machine, fusing them all together, body and soul, into a giant abomination. When entering his room, you can hear the echoes of women used to create him. And when you do finally kill him, he thanks you for finally putting it out of its misery. As you can probably tell from Dr. Thein and Thaddius, the Scourge in Vanilla WoW was way more evil and creepy than they were later on in WoW story. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like the Scourge still didn't do messed up things as time went on. They just toned down the killing, torture, and flesh manipulation of women and children, and kind of only regulated that kind of stuff to adult men. Which is to say, it still kind of stayed messed up, all the way until the very end. In this series, we'll be looking at some of the unknown and hidden things of WoW. And with this video, we'll have a soft focus on the Darkmoon Fair. First, let's go over the dangerous raid boss on the Darkmoon Island. Off the coast of the Darkmoon Island, there's a cave which has a suspicious number of skeletons in front of it. Exploring the cave, you don't really find much except for some mushrooms and normal cave decor. The skeletons seem to only be in the entrance. Occasionally, a world boss will spawn at the entrance called the Darkmoon Rabbit, and it just looks like a normal rabbit at first glance. Occasionally it'll move around and cast the Dimensional Hop ability, which probably explains how it got there in the first place. Engaging this rabbit definitely requires a raid group though, as it's incredibly difficult to try to solo as it's always considered a boss at whatever current expansion it is, and is probably the smallest boss in the game. If you do manage to kill it, there's a chance that it will drop the Darkmoon Rabbit pet, which has 3 different breeds available to it and only one of them is good. So if you manage to get the SS breed, you can sell that for quite a bit on the auction house. And the pet version of it has a slightly different model, where it basically looks the same, but it has a whole bunch of blood on its mouth. The Darkmoon Rabbit is an obvious reference to this scene from the Monty Python, where a group of knights try to fight a lone rabbit who ends up killing half the group before they run away in fear. And in the end, they end up killing it with a holy hand grenade. One of the abilities the Darkwing Rabbit has as a pet is called Huge Sharp Teeth, which is what one of the characters in the movie uses to describe how terrifying the killer rabbit is. And the ability was completely unique and only belonged to the Darkwing Rabbit when it first came out, before they gave the ability to a couple of other pets in later expansions as well. And in today's episode of Lore Reader Tales, we're going to go over a small section of history from a very prominent and important character from WoW lore, namely Zulin and uniting the Forest Trolls. You see, Zulin in troll lore is a very well-respected character, to the point where most trolls look up to this one troll who only had a prominent role during the Second War, and horde troll characters in-game would even use his name as a battle cry. And he was the first troll to be added to Heroes of the Storm, before even more notable characters like Zulin. And why was that? Well, there's this one little excerpt from the Warcraft novel called Tides of Darkness, which details the story of the Second War, a period of history which is incredibly underrepresented in the game and hardly ever talked about. That does a good job of kind of highlighting why Zulin is so well respected by pretty much all trolls of every tribe, including Zulin himself. The Horde had promised them vengeance, and Zulin believed them. The orc leader, Doomhammer, had honor about him, the honor of a strong leader secure in his own power. He would not play Zulin false, and he had vowed to help them restore the Amani Empire. Already, Zulin had started the task. He was the first forest troll since those terrible wars to reunite the tribes. One by one, he had challenged the other tribe leaders and defeated them, whether at combat or at racing or some other task, and all had bowed before him, pledging themselves and their tribes to his rule. The forest trolls were a single people once more, and with the Horde's help, they would wipe the world clean of humans and elves alike, and rule the forests once more. The orcs showed no interest in trees, and Zulin suspected they would occupy the valleys and plains of the world. Let them. All he wanted was the woods. But first, they had to take them from the elves, and that would be a pleasure. For some context, the leader of the Horde during the Second War, Doomhammer, managed to convince Zulin to join the Horde under the promise that he would allow them to have Silvermoon, and Zulin agreed, and then promptly went about and united all of the forest trolls in what basically amounted to a montage. He went up to all the other troll leaders of the various tribes and challenged their leaders to whatever they thought they were good at, and he would just beat them. The trolls all respected whoever was the strongest, and Zulin was so confident that he was the strongest that he just let the other chieftains pick whichever contest of strength they wanted to do because he knew he would win them all. And he did. Zulin was kind of one of the best trolls out of all of them, and it's so sad this little piece of information is so not well known. Whenever I see other YouTubers make lore videos that happen to cover Zulin, I'm always kind of disappointed they don't mention this fact, because it's kind of an important event that really sells the strength of Zulin, and how he came to be the leader of the trolls during the Second War, because they were not united at all before he forced them all under his leadership. And in an incredibly short amount of time too. He did all this in a span of less than a month, and they don't really talk about this in-game or in any other wikis that have lore on Zulin. In fact, the only nod I see to this little fact, surprising enough, is in the scrapped Warcraft point-and-click adventure game Lord of the Clans, where Zulin appears as a flamboyant shopkeeper, and has this little dialogue when you ask him about himself.
Tell me about yourself.
Well, surely you've heard of the notorious Zulin?
Well,
It's true. I am Zulin, once the fiercest troll ever to flay an elf. It was I who single-handedly united the trolls and the orcs to wreak havoc and destruction upon the Alliance during the war. But alas, we withered in defeat. So, you want to buy a garden gnome?
And therein concludes this little segment from a major lore character. Zulin has a lot more story to him, which is covered in more detail by a few other YouTubers, although all of them leave out this little part because it's only mentioned in this one book and only kind of as a footnote in like one sentence, which is a shame because it's kind of a really important detail. Next, we have the Death Metal Knight of the Darkmoon Fair. Located in the cave next to the Blighthead metal fans in the Darkmoon Fair, an NPC named Death Metal Knight will spawn during the performance of the Blightboar band, who performs once an hour on the half hour in order to interrupt their performance. He has his own little unique soundtrack that plays while you fight him, as well as a lot of other things in the room moving around in tandem to the little performance, as it's basically a mini raid boss. There's some achievements associated to the mini boss, and he even drops a couple of transmog items, and a toy called the Blightboar microphone, which when you use turns you into one of the members of the band and has you singing into the microphone during its duration. All of this here is basically just a simple homage to death metal genre of music, as it makes a lot of sense that the things crashing the party is a death knight, since death metal is very edgy and death related, and one of the achievements you can get is called Mosh Pit, another thing associated to concerts in general, although probably more associated to heavy metal concerts. And to end this off, we'll be going over the unknown WoW, looking at secret or hidden places throughout the game. And in this video, we'll be going over the hidden Scarlet Crusade transmog vendor. This is an NPC located in the Darkmoon Fair right next to the petting zoo. If you try to talk to her on your character normally, she won't actually do anything, other than maybe give you some rude dialogue. If you want to unlock what she has, you need to be wearing the Tabard of the Scarlet Crusade, which has a 1% chance to drop from Armsmaster Harlan in the Scarlet Halls. If you are wearing the tabard and then talk to her, she'll sell you a crop top tabard of the Scarlet Crusade for 25,000 gold. If you're a male wearer, she also offers an item called Ensemble Chain of the Scarlet Crusade for 10,000 gold. And if you're a plate wearer, she'll offer you Ensemble Scale of the Scarlet Crusade for 10,000 gold. Both of which give you a whole bunch of transmog options for Scarlet Crusade gear. Unfortunately, there are no extra rewards for cloth or leather wearers, which are the only two armor classes I have which own the tabard, so I have to go and farm it on a mail and plate wearer if I want to buy all the transmogs. In a game where two factions are in a constant state of war, and going out and massacring an entire race of creatures is the norm for starting zone level quests. What would even count in this game as a morally questionable quest, seeing as morality itself is pretty subjective? Well, quests that, after you do them, might have you thinking, was I the bad guy in this situation? Or maybe, oh, that was totally fucked up. And to start off this list, we'll start with something light. So number 10 will be the quest Tormenting the Soft Knuckles. In this quest, you're pretending to be the slave of the Wolvar, and part of the task they asked you to complete is to go out and kill some gorillas near their camp. Pretty standard stuff as far as these kinds of quests go. But they also want you to kill the head honcho gorilla. But this top gorilla will take some tracking to hunt down. So instead of doing all that, the Wolvar think it'd be a great idea to instead just go to its children and torment them until she comes out to protect them. Now, you're not exactly torturing the children or anything. You're just poking them with a stick. But still, it's never a cool thing to go around tormenting babies. But then again, you do kill a whole bunch of adult gorillas for the other quest you accept with this one. So, let's just go on to the next quest on this list. Number 9. Surrender Not. In this quest, you dress up like a Murloc and hold out a white flag, so you can walk up to the Murloc's leader and kill them without having to deal with any of its underlings. This act is also known as perfidy, and is technically a war crime. To quote Wikipedia, in the context of war, perfidy is a form of deception in which one side promises to act in good faith, such as by raising a flag of truce, with the intention of breaking that promise once the enemy is exposed, such as by coming out of cover to attack the enemy coming to take the surrendering prisoners into custody. Perfidy constitutes a breach of the laws of war, and so is a war crime, as it degrades the protections and mutual restraints developed in the interest of all parties, combatants and civilians. In practice, combatants find it difficult to respect protected persons and objects if experience causes them to believe or suspect that their adversaries are abusing a claim to protection under international law to gain a military advantage. To simplify that, it's an advantage to both sides to allow free passage of someone who surrendered, so using a surrender to gain a military advantage is just ruining it for everyone, and is heavily frowned upon, and a violation of international law. Now, the context for this quest is that the leader of the Murlocs is actually mind controlling them, and you're trying to free them or something by killing their leader. So it's not really that bad that you faked a surrender to kinda save them from mind control, but the quest giver tells you to go out and commit a war crime as if it's the most natural thing to do, with absolutely no hesitations. But ultimately, it was done for something kinda good. So, I don't know. The morality of this quest could be considered questionable. Number 8. Most Goblin Quests. The Goblins don't really have morals and only care about making a profit, so most of their quests are very questionable. Next time you do any Goblin quest, make sure to actually read the quest text. 90% of the time, they'll ask you to do something shady and act like it's nothing. Let's take the quest Bad Science Bad, for example. I was trying to domesticate the indigenous hippogriffs here using a series of debilitating electrical shocks, when for some reason they went berserk. Now my test subjects are tearing up this place for no good reason. Go slaughter my failed experiments before they find me. This quest has you go out and kill some hippogriffs who are mad, all because they had a little electrical shock live experiments done on them. Most of the quests in Ajara follow the same kind of pattern as this one. It's actually kind of funny, but if you really think about some of the things they ask you to do, you'll notice that goblins are all kind of terrible. Number 7. Rise Forsaken. This quest in the Silver Pine Forest has you go to the Fenris Isle, where there are a bunch of human refugees from Hillsbrad, who fled there in hopes of escaping the Forsaken war machine. A critical error on their part. Sylvanas has you go in and kill as many refugees as you can find, so that the Valk who goes along with you can raise them as undead to increase her army. The quest is literally no better than what the Lich King was doing, which Sylvanas herself hated. In fact, later on in the quest chain, the remaining humans on the island willingly drink Worgen blood and join the Worgens, just to avoid being killed and raised by the Forsaken as undead. Number 6. Most of the Death Knight starting zone. These quests can kind of be understood in context, as the point of the zone is to show how much of an asshole you were before you break away from the Lich King. The quests in the zone will have you killing your own subordinates as a test of strength, chasing down and killing fleeing civilians, torturing individuals for information, and probably the most f***ed up part of the zone is this one quest where you have to go in and kill a prisoner. But before you kill them, the prisoner recognizes you as their old best friend from before the war, and will tell you stories about how you both grew up together and had big dreams to become heroic adventurers. And after learning all of this, you're still forced to kill him. But like I said earlier, it's all kind of understandable in context. You're supposed to be the underling for an evil overlord, so of course you'd be going out and doing evil things. But the stuff you do is bad enough to still be worth a mention on this list. Number 5. The Art of Persuasion. In this quest, you have a prisoner, and the Kirin Tor needs information from him. The only problem is that he's not talking, and the Kirin Tor don't allow their members to use extreme measures to get information. But you, as the adventurer helping them out, are bound by no such rules. Also, he just happens to have an item on him that will inflict incredible pain, but not cause any permanent damage. It's up to you to torture this prisoner until he talks. This quest actually caught Blizzard some flack from a few gaming websites when it first came out, for having an unskippable torture quest as part of a quest chain, with no alternative routes to pursue instead of torture. In fact, because of this quest, when you do a similar quest in Cataclysm, where you capture a Quillbore and need information from him, you can just tickle the information out of him instead. Number 4. No Mercy for the Captured. In this quest, you have 4 prisoners, and it's your job to go out and kill them for being captured. When you go out to complete the quest, you have to talk to them first, and you find out that some of them got captured through no fault of their own. One guy just fell asleep in his bed and then woke up in his cage the next morning, which means they weren't captured for being double agents or anything sinister. You're just going out and killing them because I guess it's slightly easier to kill them than it would be to escort them back to town. Number 3, Fool's Gold. Now, I think this is the first Alliance-only quest on this list, but I can assure you it's not the last. The Horde isn't the only faction with questionable quests, but I will admit they do have more of them. Now, this particular quest chain involves you helping out a gnome get his hands on newly discovered oil by a displaced centaur tribe. But the Horde also want their hands on the oil. And you know what the Horde is planning on doing to get it before the Alliance can? Pay for it with gold. So it's your job to find out how much the Horde is offering. So you go in and rough up the Horde representative to see what their offer is. But it's way more than the gnome is willing to pay. So he tells you to go out and get some rocks and paint them gold, since the centaur won't know any better. But when you present the centaur with the fake gold, he notices right away, and his entire tribe turns hostile towards you. The gnome will then tell you, screw it, let's just take the oil anyway. So he sends you in to plant an oil rig to steal the oil, and also kill a few centaurs while you're at it for turning down your crappy offer. So in this situation, the Alliance go in and kill a bunch of centaurs and steal oil, while the Horde was just willing to pay for it. Number 2, Do the Right Thing. In this quest, you're given a shovel, in front of a bunch of humans who are buried up to their necks, with ghouls running around, jumping on their heads, eating them. It's up to you to go in and bash the heads in of the humans so they can have a nice, clean death, rather than being eaten alive by a ghoul. After all, it's the right thing to do. Alternatively, you can dig them out so they can escape the death camp. One of the few quests on this list with an actual peaceful option, as opposed to the gruesome, morally questionable alternative. Number 1, Jaina's Resolution. In this quest, you go around and help Jaina kill all the Blood Elf civilians in Dalaran. Oh, but it doesn't stop there. You'll also get quests to go into the sewers to find Blood Elves who might be hiding. Be given a list of elves who own shops and refuse to give up their life's work. Kill Blood Elves who are trying to withdraw their life savings from the banks. And kill or blind their Dragonhawks so they can't escape. While you're running around doing all these things, Jaina can be found leisurely strolling through the city with her water elementals, striking down all fleeing Blood Elf civilians that cross her path. And all because Garrosh moved a bell through the city while the Blood Elves turned a blind eye. You also later find out that the King of Stormwind was in talks with the Blood Elves to join the Alliance. But after you help Jaina massacre their citizens in Dalaran, negotiations kind of fall through for some reason. Leave it to the Alliance to take the number 1 spot on this list. Bunch of monsters if you ask me. This video will be a collection of 10 lore-important liches from WoW that you may or may not have heard of before, and I'll have them ranked from least important to the ones with the most amount of lore. And at number 10, we have Velzan the Duskbringer. Back in Vanilla WoW, after players kill Kel'Thuzad in Naxxramas and retrieve his phylactery, there was a quest to turn the phylactery into a priest named Inigo Montoy. But later on, you learn that the Argent Dawn never actually got the phylactery, and it turns out the priest was a traitor working for the Lich King the whole time, and is the reason Kel'Thuzad returned in wrath. Now, a little history on liches. What makes liches incredibly powerful, besides their magical ability and necromantic powers, is that if they die, their soul will simply find its way back to their phylactery and eventually reform their body. So the only way to truly kill a lich is to destroy their phylactery. And because of this, most liches in fantasy hide their phylacteries really well. But in WoW, it's usually the case that they just kind of hold on to it, or have it nearby. Anyways, as a reward from the Lich King for retrieving Kel'Thuzad's phylactery, Inigo was turned into a lich. As liches are generally the best of the best when it comes to undead spellcasters, there are very few of them, and most of the ones that exist became liches through the Lich King's power. Number 9. Amnanar the Coldbringer. This lich was part of the invasion force on Mount Hyjal during the Third War, and was tasked by the Lich King to expand the Scourge's influence across Kalimdor. He then decided that the Quillboar would make an excellent army, and created the strongest abomination the Scourge had ever controlled, known as Tartak the Enraged, who single-handedly killed 1,200 Quillboars before falling, and is considered a hero of the Scourge because of it. And it was because of Tartak that Amninar was able to create the first sizable army of undead on Kalimdor, thanks to all of the corpses he created. He then raised what he could of the remains of the abomination into a lesser one known as Gluton, and set up an outpost in Razorfen Downs. During Vanilla WoW, players go into Razorfen and kill Amninar as the final boss. And then in Warlords of Draenor, the story continues, as one of the Quilboar found Amninar's phylactery and was attempting to summon him again. So the Red Dragon Koristraza helps you put a stop to this, and ultimately takes his phylactery after he's defeated for a second time, to try and find a way to destroy it permanently. Number 8. Tanithal. Tanithal is one of 2 liches in the game that appears as friendly towards players, though it's not actually friendly and instead just part of a quest in the Boran Tundra. The Sarion is trying to get information out of him, but is unable to hurt his physical body, so he tasks you with retrieving his phylactery, which is at the bottom of a small lake guarded by a shade. Once you have it, the Sarion will then send you on more quests while he interrogates the Lich to find out how to get into the Naxanar necropolis. And then eventually, he learns what he needs and goes off to face the Lich King. But you never actually interact with the Lich himself, so it's a wonder why it's a friendly target. My own speculation was that they didn't want anyone to actually attack it, so to 100% make sure, they just made it friendly. Or it was probably just done at random. That's usually the case for things like this, as I found out when I was reading the WoW Diary book. Number 7. Amalthazad. This is the other friendly lich in the game, but unlike Tanithal, you can actually talk to this one. This lich is the trainer for Death Knights in the DK starting zone, and follows you when you break free from the Lich King. Amal himself was once a powerful frost mage, and was so good in fact that he impressed the Lich King, so he raised him as a lich when he died in battle, where he then used his power to teach frost to new Death Knights. During Legion, Amalthazad returns as a follower for the Death Knight Order Hall, and when he appears in battle, he dual-wields swords just like a Frost DK. And also on the Broken Shore, there is a Death Knight-only world quest, where Illidan will say, your pet lich professes to have a plan that requires the bones of the sacrifice to the Fel. Help him if you think it will help our cause, but keep that thing in check. Where you just collect bones because he wants to research them, and see what the Legion is doing with its dead. And when the world quest is completed, Illidan will remark at the usefulness of necromancy, which could be a small hint at a necromancer class in the future. If Blizzard were to ever add necromancers to the game, there's Amalthazad, and one other lich on this list that could totally be their trainers, but we'll get to that other one in a bit. Number 6. Araj the Summoner. This lich used to hang out in the Western Plaguelands in Vanilla WoW as a level 61 elite in a zone that was not a max level zone. It was close enough though. The level range for Western Plaguelands in Vanilla was about 51 to 58. It's just Vanilla WoW loved to balance hard quest mobs by just having them be a higher level than everything else. Anyways, originally you could summon him by destroying some crystals in the towers of Anderhall, before he was just turned into just an elite mob out in the world. The lore for Araj was that he was responsible for spreading the plague in the area, and was formerly the leader of Scholomance, but took off for Anderhall on his new mission. After Arthus was defeated, Araj tried his best to lead the remains of the Scourge, and was killed by adventurers of both factions in a bid to end the stalemate of Anderhall. And just like a lot of the bad liches in WoW, he drops his phylactery after being killed, so you can kill him for good. Number 5. Ross Frostwhisper. This lich is a boss in old school Scholomance, and was better known for the alchemy lab in his room than anything else. You see, in the early days of WoW, there was only one alchemy lab in the game, and you could not craft flasks unless you were near an alchemy lab, so you had to go into Scholomance and clear up to Ross to make flasks, which required killing at least one boss to get a key, and then the trash up to the lich's room. Later on, they did add another alchemy lab to the game, except inside a raid behind 3 boss kills. So alchemists got very familiar with Ross Frostwhisper. Ross himself was once a human mage from Stromgarde. He never got official training from Dalaran and was considered a rogue mage, who eagerly joined the Cult of the Damned when Kel'Thuzad went around looking for members. In Stratholme, he killed himself with a dagger with a smile on his face inside of a pentagram, because he was finally going to get the immortality he was promised, and was raised as a lich by the Lich King himself. and then spent most of his time in Scholomance teaching new necromancers. What's interesting about Ross is the way that he's killed. He either doesn't have a phylactery, or they don't know how to find it. So instead, there is a quest where you attempt to rob him of his lich powers and turn him back into a mortal, and then kill him in his mortal form. The quest involves making a pseudo-phylactery by using a book from his past life and finding his soul in Stratholme where he died, and then using them to turn him back into a mortal. And this is one of the very few times in WoW where an undead has their mortality restored. And since he's killed in this way, he's dead. And when Scholomance was revamped in Mist of Pandaria, they permanently removed Ross from the game since he was permanently killed in Vanilla WoW. Number 4, Lady Death Whisperer. Lady Death Whisperer is the second boss of ICC, and is the supreme overseer of the Cult of the Damned. When you enter her room for the first time, she has a very long voice dialogue trying to convince her followers about the joys of being undead. In fact, it might be one of the longest intro dialogues in the game. She doesn't really have much lore besides that, as she was created just for the instance. Blizzard does this for literally every single raid. They just create bosses out of thin air to have something to fight against, and Lady Death Whisperer is just one of those. Number 3, Gunther Arcanus. Gunther is the only lich on this list who isn't a giant floating skeleton, and his case is a little different than the other liches in this video. You see, based on WoW lore, liches can only come into existence by the power of a greater power granting them lichdom. It's not something you can just do on your own, and that's why pretty much all the other liches on this list have the same backstory of the Lich King being the one who turned them into a lich. Except, of course, for Gunther Arcanus. Gunther was already a powerful mage and necromancer in life, so when he fell to the Scourge during the Third War, he just broke away from the Lich King's control on his own, and just kind of went off to do his own thing. And this was before Sylvanas and all the other undead broke free from the Lich King when he was weak. Gunther was so strong, he did it on his own during the Lich King's full power, and also just willingly turned himself into a lich afterwards. In Vanilla WoW, there was a quest to go to the island where he's stationed to try and ask if he'd join Sylvanas' Forsaken, but Gunther doesn't believe there are other free-willed undead like him. So the quest chain is basically just about proving to him that other undead have also broken free from the Lich King. But this quest chain doesn't exist in the revamp zones from Tirisfal, but Gunther does still remain on the island. If Blizzard were to add necromancers to the game, Gunther and Amalthazad could totally be lore-relevant teachers to their creation, as both are already established necromancers in lore, and friendly to player characters in one way or another. Number 2, Timolen the Accursed. This lich model was added in Legion as an NPC for the Ashbringer hidden artifact appearance, but he has his roots going back to Vanilla WoW. You see, there was a quest item that dropped from a slime called Timolen's Phylactery, which didn't actually start a quest, and wasn't involved in any quest chains. Then in patch 1.7, the item was removed from the slime's loot table. Players in Vanilla WoW were on a hunt to find out how to obtain the Ashbringer, and they thought Timolen was maybe the person who created the Ashbringer because of hints Blizzard dropped throughout the game. It's widely speculated that Blizzard was going to put the Ashbringer in the game, and then changed their minds at the last second and added Thunder Fury in its place. And that's why Timolen's Phylactery was removed, as it was probably part of the removed quest to get the Ashbringer. Then in Legion, as part of getting the hidden artifact appearance for the Ashbringer, you have to basically do stuff that involves all of the old Vanilla WoW rumors on the Ashbringer, and part of them includes finding Timolen's Phylactery from a large slime. Turns out, he was killed by Ysilian of the Scarlet Crusade, and fed to a slime to dispose of his body for creating a dark weapon. And while Timolen was dying, he thought to put his study of necromancy to use and created a phylactery for his soul, not knowing if it would actually work or not while he was slowly being digested. And then threw the dark crystal into the lake. So, just like Gunther, Timolen turned himself into a lich rather than being granted the power. And then basically the quest chain for the artifact concludes with you fishing up the crystal and then taking it to the Four Horsemen and having it empowered or something. But it was really great of Blizzard to finally answer who Timolen was after all of these years, and put him into the game in a way that plays homage to his origins. And number 1, the most asked for hero in Heroes of the Storm, and the most iconic lich in the game, Kel'Thuzad. Now, I've actually done a Villains Corner video on Kel, so I'm going to use the drawings from that video for this part. Basically, Kel'Thuzad was a human mage of Dalaran who got exiled for practicing necromancy, and went to the Lich King to learn more about it. The Lich King offered him power in exchange for creating the Cult of the Damned and spreading the plague throughout the human kingdoms, something Kel'Thuzad was very successful with. After being killed by Arthus, he was then raised by Arthus after he turned into the Lich King by the powers of the Sunwell. Arthus basically destroyed the kingdom of Quel'Thalas to bring Kel'Thuzad into the world as a powerful lich. Kel'Thuzad then summoned Archimonde into the world and got Dalaran destroyed. But you see, Kel'Thuzad and Arthus were secretly working against the Burning Legion for Ner'zhul, and used the Legion invasion as a distraction to free him from the Legion's control. So while Arthus went out and did his thing, Kel'Thuzad stayed in Lordaeron and waited for his return. When the Lich King started to weaken, and Sylvanas almost killed Arthus, Kel'Thuzad was the one who saved his life, and made sure he made it to Northrend safely. Kel'Thuzad then hung out in the Plaguelands trying to build up the power of the Scourge, and was even successful in corrupting the Ashbringer and raising its former owner as a Death Knight under his control, before finally being killed as the last boss in the last raid of Vanilla WoW. But, seeing as his phylactery was recovered by Vel'Zan, he was brought back in Wrath of the Lich King and was the final boss of the revamped Naxx. Kel'Thuzad has to be one of the most successful villains in the Warcraft story, being the one to carry out the plague that destroyed Lordaeron, being the reason Silvermoon and Dalaran were destroyed, successfully stopping the power of the Ashbringer, a weapon, mind you, that was a complete counter to his army, and turning it to his side, and being the one to personally summon Archimonde into Azeroth, which led to the second Burning Legion invasion. He was so influential that if you could go back in time to kill one person to stop all kinds of destruction, killing human Kel'Thuzad would be more effective than taking out Arthus. And that's part of the reasons he's such a fan-favorite character. He was also the only person the Lich King considered a friend, and even had a pet cat. And that's not the end of the list. For this video, we have a secret number 0 spot, and that could only go to the Lich King himself. The Lich King is involved in pretty much all of the liches on this list in one way or another, and is known as the Lich King, even if he's more properly described as a Death Knight. It just wouldn't be a Lich video without mentioning the Lich King, but that's all I'm going to say about him. The Lich King has a super long story, one that most people already know, as he's also the most popular villain in Warcraft, period, and probably one of the most popular villains of all time. And at number 10, we have the Eye of Paleth. This little quest chain starts off innocently enough. You talk with First Mate Fitzsimmons, who's right outside the inn in the wetlands, who tells you to fetch his beer, after which he'll tell you this little story. I am the sole survivor of the ill-fated Third Fleet of Kul Tiras, wrecked off the coast to the north. One of our ships has hidden a great and terrible treasure, and the eerie power of it keeps the souls of my brothers trapped within the ship's rotting hulls. I'm haunted by them day and night. My first mate, Snelling, calls for me. He's supposed to be dead. Please, look for him near the shipwrecks, and just tell him to leave me alone. You'll then embark on a series of quests that involve killing the ghosts on the ship and retrieving the cursed treasure at the bottom of the wrecked ship. Upon discovering the cursed treasure called the Eye of Paleth, the quest will then tell you that such an evil artifact must be cleansed, and should be taken to a priest back in town. Once you arrive to the priest, however, the dwarf has something unexpected to tell you. The Eye of Paleth. You say Fitzsimmons sent you out? By the light, not again. Fitzsimmons is dead, lad. You're not the first to come here like this either. It turns out the person who gave you the quest in the first place right outside the inn is actually dead, and once you complete the quest chain, he will no longer be in his spot, as if he disappeared. On quest completion, the dwarf priest will tell you this. The Eye of Paleth was retrieved and cleansed a long time ago. We thought the curse lifted. Not a year ago, poor old Fitzsimmons passed on, his body ruined by drink. Ever since, now and then, people claim he's spoken to them and told them to get the eye, cursed to roam the earth forever. Not even poor Fitzsimmons could escape. Don't ask me what you actually brought me. You're better off forgetting this ever happened. And at number 9, we have Guise of the Deceiver. A little backstory about this quest. Back in the Burning Crusade in Old Nagran, there's this hidden spot in the mountains only accessible by flying, which has no quest or lore, but does have what looks to be a daycare run by a troll named Chalet. Since there is a cage behind the hut with a small skeleton and a doghouse with rotting meat inside, it was always a very creepy hidden thing in WoW. and spawned lots of fan theories that Chale was actually a cannibal eating the children. But nothing official from Blizzard was ever really said, until Warlords of Draenor's that is, and this tiny little quest chain. In the Throne of Elements, the Wind Elemental will tell you to check up on his old friend, an old shaman hanging out on a cliff. The shaman will then tell you a story about how his wife died many years ago when he was young, and knows that he's going to die soon. So he sends you on a fetch quest to grab a flower that was his wife's favorite. The next quest you receive goes a little something like this. In a cave not far from here, there lives an old woman named Chale. I knew Chale many years ago when I was young. Though I have become an old and gray, she has kept her youth and beauty. Chale was jealous of my love for Dahaka, and I have long since suspected that Chale had a part in her death. However, without evidence, I could not bring justice against her. Meet with Chale and tell her that I am dying. Tell her that I wish to know the truth of Dahaka's fate before I leave this world. When you go to the cave to confront Chale, she transforms into the old shaman's wife and essentially tells you that she's a shapeshifter who kills people to stay young and transforms into them. When she's low in health, she transforms into the troll model she has in Old Nagran, which begs the question, what is she? Is she really an orc or something else? Her whole existence is just one creepy mystery. After you tell the shaman what happened to his wife all those years ago, he lays down to die and is reunited with his wife in the afterlife. And at number 8, we have Swamp Eye Jarl. Deep in Dustwallow Marsh, there is a short series of quest chains that take place side by side. Swamp Eye Jarl will send you on fetch quests for some really weird stuff like frog legs to make soup, and the guy inside, Mordant Gimsey, is a friend of Jarl who came out to visit and is worried about his friend, who's living in the middle of a creepy swamp with undead roaming around eating frog leg stew, and asks you to investigate the cause through a series of quests. While killing the undeads around the house, upon death, their ghosts will tell you a little bit about the place. The gist of all of their messages, though, is that whoever moves to Witch Hill is taken over by a demon, and that it's too late to save Jarl. Jarl, meanwhile, sends you on another quest to fetch spider eyes. You then go on a quest for Jarl's friend to grab herbs that might help, which actually manage to spawn the demon controlling the place. Once you kill it, Jarl's friend is surprised it worked and thanks you for saving Jarl. And that's pretty much it. This quest chain is pretty tame compared to the other ones on this list, but the whole environment and theme of the quest as it progresses is very creepy, even if the payoff of the quest chain isn't that strong. And at number 7, we have the Jorgen Worgen. This quest starts off with you sent to investigate a pile of dirt one of the wild Worgen in the area was poking through. Once you reach said pile of dirt and investigate, a Worgen jumps out of nowhere, stunning you, then running away. You go back and tell them what happened, and you're sent to an alchemist who has a potion that might be able to bring the Worgen back to sanity. He then tells you to give the potion to said Ravage Worgen. When out looking for him, he'll jump out and attack you from nowhere just like last time. Once you give him the potion, you take him back to town where this little scene plays out. It's working. Hold him still, Jitters. I can't. Jitters? Damn it, Jitters. I said hold. Jitters? I remember now. It's all your fault. You brought the Worgen to Duskwood. You led the Dark Riders to my farm and hid while they murdered my family. Every speck of suffering in my life is your pathetic fault. I should kill you. Letting him go is the only thing that's going to separate you from the beast now, my friend. You've got a lot to make up for, Jitters. I won't give you the easy way out. Back in Vanilla, there was a quest giver called Sven Jorgen, the Worgen from this quest chain. He and his family once owned the Jorgen farmstead, but whilst he was out one day, Dark Riders appeared looking for the Scythe of Elune and killed his wife and children. Sven was seeking to find the identity of the shadowy figure he spotted at his farm, which turned out to be Jitters. Sven will then send you on a mission to kill the necromancer Morbent Fell, which takes you on a very long journey through hordes of undeads throughout a very huge crypt. After you kill the necromancer and turn in the quest to Sven Jorgen, he says, "May the disgusting monster stay dead this time. I'll head down there and scatter his remains to ash myself. You've done a great thing. Perhaps in time, Duskwood can return to its former peaceful state." Now, why is this quest chain creepy? Well, because if it's your first time doing it, there are 2 jump scares and the Worgen pops out of nowhere, in an already pretty creepy zone, plus the part where you explore the crypts. Those crypts are huge, like way bigger than I thought they'd be for a low-level quest zone, and densely packed with ghouls of appropriate level. Usually when an area has a higher than normal density of mobs, they scale them down a little so that you can actually get to them easier. Not these guys. They're all full-strength mobs you'd fight as part of any normal quest, except there's tons of them. Plus, the crypts, while being huge, are also pretty creepy and similar to the Kazan Crips. I'm currently writing an interactive story involving the Kazan Crips, so I know the place inside and out from exploring it so much, and the crypts in this quest chain are almost identical. The whole quest chain is totally worth playing though, even if it's not as creepy as some of the other quests on this list. And at number 6, we have Writings of the Void. In Cataclysm, Dark Shore got quite messed up, leaving big whirlpools, but there is one place in particular, the Maw of the Void, where there's a giant whirlpool located. Jumping into it will take you to a cave with old ruins with a night elf with Illidan's model. There are also 2 forlorn highborn saying, "It's all lost," and "Join us forever." When you approach Talaris, the demon hunter, he shouts, "You are not of the dark path, you do not belong here." And if you're Alliance, he also drops right into the Dark Herald, which will give you a quest. When turning it in, the quest giver will say, "Where did you find these? You haven't shown them to anyone else, have you? I apologize, you took me off guard." Talarius was a very powerful demon hunter, but he was slain during a confrontation with the Warden, Maev, many years ago. You are fortunate that his ghost was only a shade of his former power. I wonder how many have found their way to him in those ruins. I will see to it that these scrolls make their way to the High Priestess immediately. Thank you. Approaching the cave, it's quite a creepy place, and it seems like the spirits are trapped there, being tortured as the Highborn ghost says, "The cold comes." Turning in the quest also gives you quite a neat achievement. And at number 5, we have Stitches. The long quest chain starts off with Abercrombie, a guy who pretends to be a feeble old man and has you run errands for him, which later turned out to be parts to build an abomination named Stitches. Back in the early days of WoW, before everyone was even level 60 yet, Stitches was a level 50-ish elite who would just annihilate an entire town. Stitches would basically walk down the path of Darkshore, untouched, destroying the Night Watch on his path, where there would be a bunch of WoW players ready to die fighting him to protect Darkshire, since the guards in town were basically worthless to Stitches who tore through them like it was nothing. Stitches would just go around killing everything until he died. That included other quest givers, flight masters, and innkeepers. Even later on in vanilla, when max level players could repel him, Stitches was still a thing to be feared while leveling in Darkshire, as you never knew if this monstrosity of death would come to town to kill you or accidentally run into him on the road. And at number 4, we have the Forgotten Caves. Now, this is actually a bonus objective and not a real quest. But I mean, it gives you experience and gold when you complete the task assigned to it, so it kind of counts. The Forgotten Cave bonus objective requires you to go in and kill a bunch of spiders. But each time a spider bites you, your screen will look as if you're dizzy. And once you reach 10 stacks of the poison, you go insane. And delusional ghosts will pop out and attack you randomly. And did I mention this place is crawling with a ton of spiders and webs? Because that's kind of important and why this place is really creepy. I mean, unless you're some kind of person who just really likes spiders and the thought of going insane. And at number 3, we have How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies, a quest in the DK Starting Zone. In fact, a lot of the quests in the DK Starting Zone are pretty darn creepy and disturbing. I remember the quest right before How to Win Friends has you go into town and kill unarmed citizens who are just standing there screaming and begging you not to kill them. The quest How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies has you equip 2 hot pokers and run around to members of the Scarlet Crusade to persuade them into telling you about their plans. One of the few quests in WoW where you just straight up torture people. And this takes a lot of persuading on a ton of Scarlet Crusade members, as the chance for them to talk is kind of low. And of course, after one of them finally does talk, they have a little emote that says they died from the torture. So, good job, you just tortured someone to death. If you ever find yourself doing the DK Starting Zone, I highly recommend you take the time to read the quest text, as it's a really great zone in general and very creepy in nature. And at number 2, we'll be cheating a little bit because it'll be a combination of quests I've already covered in some of my other videos, but they're totally creepy enough to warrant a spot on this list, and would be a shame not to include them. And that would be the Legend of Stalon quest chain that I covered as number 5 in my best quest chains video, and the Do the Right Thing quest that I covered as number 1 in my Creepy Things in WoW video. The Legend of Stalon was just a very long quest chain that had you go all around the world looking for pages of a journal by Stalon and uncover his past. Stalon was a teacher at Moonbrook before it got overtaken by the Defias. Then he became a private tutor for a noble and fell in love with the daughter of the household. When the daughter got engaged, Stalon was not too happy about this, as he had already reached a delusional state of affection for her. When the girl introduced her fiancé to Stalon, however, she made the mistake of referring to him as old. He flew into a murderous rage and killed the whole family. In the quest chain's conclusion, you're asked to kill the undead Stalon to put an end to him. A shortened version of the quest chain still exists in-game in Darkshire, with a few things changed and Worgens added in for some weird reason. But it's still pretty faithful to the old version, so I highly recommend checking it out. The Do the Right Thing quest takes place in the Sludge Fields, where one of Sylvanas' agents went rogue and started doing all kinds of crazy experiments. In this quest, you're given a shovel and told to do the right thing with a field full of humans buried up to their neck. You can either bash their heads in or dig them out. Both options give you credit towards the quest. Afterwards, you'll be given a shovel with an on-use effect that lets you do the right thing as much as you want. And at number 1, we have Wrath of the Lich King. I'm not kidding, that's the name of this quest. The quest is more of a dungeon boss than a quest, but it has a quest associated to it, so it counts in my books. The quest is the final boss of the Halls of Reflection encounter, where you find Sylvanas, or Jaina if you're an Alliance, fighting the Lich King and fail miserably. She will then stun the Lich King and tell you to run for your life, as he is so strong you literally have no other choice. The Lich King, however, finds this amusing and blocks off your escape while walking very slowly towards you. It's your job to protect Sylvanas while she breaks the barricades the Lich King created, all while he just walks ever so slowly towards your location, with a giant frost aura that really drives home the point of this thing is death if it reaches you. It's one of the few, if not the only fight in the game I can think of where you're just running away, and it's just a great form of storytelling from a point of view, because that's exactly what you should do if you happen to run into a final boss of the expansion in a dungeon. In today's episode of the Villains Corner, we will be going over the story of the Headless Horseman, a popular holiday boss that appears only for Hollow's End, but has history with WoW's lore nonetheless. The Headless Horseman was once a paladin of the Silver Hand named Thomas Thompson, and was there when Arthus called for the calling of Stratholme. Thomas refused the order along with Uther, and went to go protect a nearby local town instead, as the whole countryside was having a scourge problem. But the town he was protecting was sent infected food by Baron Rivendare, a future Four Horsemen, and someone Thomas thought he could trust. And the people he was protecting turned on him as they became mindless ghouls, and he was forced to kill them. So Thomas reported the incident to his fellow paladins, and was very distraught over the betrayal of Rivendare. So the paladins sent him back home to spend some time with his family so he could recover. Then, when Uther was killed, a call was made for all remaining members of the Silver Hand to come together to help fight the Scourge. So Sir Thomas personally put his family on a boat that would sail to Kalimdor with Jaina, safe from the plague and the Scourge. Then, for the next 4 years after, he helped fight the Scourge, and eventually becomes a member of the Scarlet Crusade, along with the remaining members of the Silver Hand. The Scarlet Crusade at this time was ruled by a Dreadlord, who convinced all of his followers that even normal, healthy-looking people could secretly be Scourge in disguise. So, the Scarlet Crusade went out, purging villages of normal people if they thought they were suspicious. While Sir Thomas was participating in purging a village, he recognizes his daughter right as he kills her, and realized he had killed his wife as well, even though they were supposed to be on another continent. Turns out that there was a storm that forced the boat to turn back, and his family spent their time in this village instead of heading back to Kalimdor. Sir Thomas, ever the family man, goes crazy after finding out he killed his own family and gets locked up by the Scarlet Crusade. While locked up, he cries and howls and would chant creepy rhymes. He really grew fond of rhymes. The Scarlet Crusade thought he could still be useful if sent loose on the Scourge, though, so they put him into battle. But while he did kill the Scourge, he also started killing other members of the Scarlet Crusade, because to him, everyone was the Scourge in disguise. So the Crusade cut off his head to stop his rampage. Later, the Dreadlord in charge of the Crusade stole his body and raised him as a Death Knight on Hollow's End, as part of one of his experiments. And now he goes around killing people because he thinks everyone is evil, and he's just being the good guy trying to stop them, all while rhyming the entire time. Then, when players kill him in the Scarlet Monastery, Thomas will appear in his human form as a ghost, and will say, "For ages I was lost. Now, finally, I see how dark my soul had become." Meaning, he gained his lost sanity back in death, and was able to pass on peacefully. Today we'll be going over some of the hardest to earn seasonal achievements. Since seasonal and holiday events only occur for a limited time of the year, players only have a brief window of time to actually complete them, which adds another layer of difficulty since they are essentially time-gated and you have to remember to do them while they're up. And at number 10, we have the achievement Tricks and Treats of Azeroth. This achievement can only be earned during Hollow's End, which is essentially WoW's equivalent of Halloween, and is active around the last 2 weeks of the month of October. This achievement requires a player to complete a quest called Candy Bucket from many different candy buckets in different inns across the Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, and Outland. The name of this achievement is a little bit of a misnomer since Outland is not Azeroth, but because achievements weren't added into the game until Wrath, the Vanilla and Burning Crusade candy buckets were lumped together into one achievement. In addition to Wrath, the Cataclysm and Pandaria expansions have their own achievements for collecting candy buckets as well. However, these achievements are much less intensive to do than what is required for the Tricks and Treats of Azeroth achievement. At most inns, there will be a candy bucket with a quest over it. Upon clicking on the candy bucket, you'll get a quest also called Candy Bucket. Turning in the quest may reward you with a handful of treats, or a trick by transforming you for 30 seconds. The handful of treats can contain masks, tricky treats, wands, toothpicks, and candy, amongst several other things. Most of these items are used in other achievements during Hallow's End, so you might want to keep them. While there are slight variations for the Horde and Alliance in terms of numbers of inns and various locations, in total, a player will need to fly around 3 continents and collect some 75 candy buckets or so. On average, there are usually roughly 2 candy buckets per zone, and with the vanilla zones in the Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, and Outlands, those numbers add up fast. Overall, this achievement isn't necessarily hard to obtain, but it does require perseverance, since it takes a lot of time and effort, especially if you haven't explored these areas yet or are unfamiliar with them. Tricks and Treats of Azeroth is required achievement for the Hallow's End Mendo achievement, Hallowed Be Thy Name. And at number 9, we have a grouping of 4 achievements, which can only be earned during the Midsummer Fire Festival. These 4 achievements are called the Fires of Azeroth, Desecration of the Alliance, and Desecration of the Horde. The Midsummer Fire Festival occurs around the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice, and the in-game event lasts for around 2 weeks in late June and early July. These achievements are similar to previous achievements at the number 10, Tricks and Treats of Azeroth. However, these Midsummer Fire Festival achievements require a great deal more flying and questing to complete, so they're tougher than Tricks and Treats of Azeroth, and because of that are at number 9 on this list. During the Midsummer Fire Festival, there are bonfires that appear in every zone. These bonfires are usually close to a city, town, or camp, and there's usually 2 bonfires in any contested zone. One bonfire for the Alliance and the other bonfire for the Horde. At each bonfire, the player can either honor the bonfire it's in for the faction, or extinguish the bonfire if it belongs to the opposite faction. Players can do this in each zone with a short quest. As such, the Horde and Alliance versions of these achievements are, once again, slightly different, since many locations are different, but overall, the 2 achievements are very similar. To obtain the Fires of Azeroth achievement, the player needs to honor all of the bonfires for 5 different subzone achievements. For Alliance players, they need to earn 5 Flame Warden achievements, and Horde players need to earn 5 Flamekeeper achievements. Since Cataclysm, the Fires of Azeroth achievement requires the player to honor all of the bonfires in the Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, all the Cataclysm zones, Northrend, and Outland. Technically, both factions' versions of these achievements are inherently different since the bonfires are in different places and sometimes even in different zones. But all 4 achievements require traversing all of the aforementioned continents, zones, and worlds and honoring or extinguishing the 2 factions' bonfires there. Every expansion has received another achievement for honoring and desecrating bonfires, with the exception of Shadowlands. Doing all the bonfires of the 5 continents from Vanilla and the first 3 expansions of WoW are currently required for the meta achievement Fires of Azeroth. This means in addition to the 100+ bonfires listed, bonfires can still be found in the Broken Isles, Draenor, Kul Tiras, Pandaria, and Zandalar. Overall, this achievement is super difficult and hard to complete because it can easily take several hours, especially without teleports and multiple Hearthstones. The Fires of Azeroth and the Desecration achievement of the Others faction's fires are required achievements for the Midsummer Fire Festival meta achievements Flamekeeper for the Horde and Flame Warden for the Alliance. And at number 8, we have the achievement The Masquerade, which is another achievement from Hallow's End. When looting the candy buckets discussed at the number 10 spot, players have a chance to receive 16 different wands. Each hollowed wand has 5 charges and will transform the targeted player into a mob from the wand's name. For example, a hollow wand skeleton will give the player a costume of a spooky scary skeleton. This costume lasts for 1 hour and can easily be removed by right-clicking off the buff. The costumes unfortunately do not persist through death. For this achievement, the player only needs to be transformed into 7 of these creatures: a bat, a ghost, a leopard gnome, a ninja, a pirate, a wisp, and a skeleton. Each of these wands only has a 2% chance to drop from each candy bucket, meaning you might not get all 7 hollowed wands you need for the achievement, even if you visited every single candy bucket in-game. These wands can also be obtained from doing the Hallow's End dailies and drop from the Headless Horseman. To make matters worse, hollowed wands are soulbound so they cannot be traded to or bought from other players. Additionally, the player cannot cast a wand effect on themselves, which means they must have someone else do it for them. Finally, players could only loot 1 candy bucket once per hour. All of this made the Masquerade achievement especially hard when it was added in Wrath of the Lich King. Since the drop rate of most of the hollowed wands was so low, and the wands only had 5 charges, it was almost impossible to earn this achievement. Blizzard eventually saw this, and as bad luck protection, they added 2 vendor NPCs to the faction capitals in Cataclysm. Stymie is located in Stormwind, and Darla is located in the Undercity. Both these NPCs sell all of the hollowed wands in the game for 2 tricky treats each. On average, 1 candy bucket gives 2 to 3 tricky treats, so you should have enough to buy all the hollowed wands if you visit several candy buckets and do not spend your tricky treats on other goodies. So in order to get the achievement, most players will have to make or find a group of other players to do all 7 required wands. Luckily, however, there are usually several pre-made groups in the group finder that are working on this achievement during Hallow's End. This actually makes it one of the most social achievements in the game to get, since you have to go out of your way to ask another player that has the wands and how many charges they have left on their wands. Still, it might take a bit of your time to find that one last player that has the wand you need to earn your achievement. In Warlords of Draenor, several more hollowed wands were added to the game, including the Abomination, Geist, Ghoul, Slime, Spider, Banshee, Gargoyle, Nerubian, and White wands. Since Cataclysm and the addition of the bad luck vendors, this achievement has been considerably less difficult. But that doesn't mean it's still easy to get and find groups of nice players that have the wands you need. You could also say it's become easier since each expansion has usually added more candy buckets to the game. This means any new player can now receive more trick or treats than anyone was able to in Cataclysm, which means players can buy even more wands to help out their friends, guilds, and strangers. Because this achievement was so difficult to earn in Wrath, and because it forces a lot of players to go outside of their comfort zone to ask other players to help, it is at the number 8 spot on this list. And at number 7, we have the achievement, A Mask for All Occasions, which is also another achievement from the Hollow's End event. The candy bucket located in inns that drop tricky treats and other goodies during Hollow's End have a less than 1% chance to drop one of 24 different masks. As of Cataclysm, the player has to wear 24 of these masks to earn the achievement, A Mask for All Occasions. The currently required 24 masks include all 12 of the playable races in the game during Cataclysm, with a male and female for each. There are 6 Alliance races, Draenei, Dwarf, Gnome, Human, Night Elf, and Worgen, and 6 Horde races, Blood Elves, Goblins, Orcs, Taurens, Trolls, and Undead. Like the Hollowed Wands in the previous entry, these masks are soulbound and cannot be traded or bought from other players. As a tangent, thank goodness Blizzard has not changed the requirements for this achievement by adding new masks for each new race or allied race. Since Cataclysm, 11 new races or allied races have been added to the game as of patch 9.2 and of the writing of this video. If Blizzard decided to expand this achievement in current WoW and included adding Demon Hunter masks, that would double the mask requirement for the achievement to a total of 48 masks. And that's not even including the Drakthir and Dragonflight. A total of 50 masks needed for A Mask of All Occasions, and 10.0 would be a very spooky thing indeed for Hollow's End achievement. Some of you might be thinking, wait, isn't that achievement pretty easy to get? And while in current WoW it is, we need to look at the history of the achievement to understand it. When the achievement A Mask for All Occasions was added to the game in Wrath of the Lich King, it only required 20 masks, since the Worgen and Goblin races were not playable yet. However, this achievement was also considerably harder to get during Wrath of the Lich King because there was no bad luck protection. As mentioned, considering each mask has a less than 1% chance to drop from a candy bucket, and A Mask for All Occasions require 20 different masks in Wrath, just the chance you would get more than a couple of masks to drop is extremely small, no matter how many candy buckets you visited. In fact, this achievement was so hard to get that in Cataclysm, Blizzard turned the tricky treats into a currency and added vendors so players could just buy the masks. The Hollow's End vendors Blizzard added in Cataclysm are Spanky, who's located in Stormwind in the Valley of Heroes, and Farina, who's located in the Undercity Courtyard. Each mask only costs 2 tricky treats. As such, the achievement in current WoW is very easy to obtain as long as the player visits enough candy buckets. At the most, 48 tricky treats would be required to buy all the masks, provided none of the masks drop while farming the tricky treats. Masks can be obtained by doing Hollow's End dailies and defeating the Headless Horseman, but buying them with tricky treats is by far the easiest way to get them and provide you with a specific one. The mask vendors also sell Murloc, Naga, Ogre, and Vicro masks for 5 tricky treats each. These masks are not required for the achievement, but do give the player a minor buff to agility, intellect, stamina, and strength respectively. Luckily, this achievement is not required for the Hollow's End meta achievement, Hallowed Be Thy Name, although it originally was briefly in the very beginning of Wrath of the Lich King. It seemed even Blizzard realized how hard this achievement was due to the pure RNG back then and had to remove it. Because of how hard it was to achieve in Wrath, and still requires a considerable amount of farming to get even now, A Mask for All Occasions does make it at number 7. And at number 6, we have a collection of 4 achievements which are all thematically very similar, so we decide to lump them together. These achievements are Fistful of Love, Shake Your Bunny Maker, Check Your Head, and Let It Snow, from the holiday events Love is in the Air, Noble Garden, Hollow's End, and the Feast of Wintervale respectively. To get all these achievements, the player must use seasonal items on specific players, which we'll discuss in detail. All 4 of these achievements are required for the respective meta achievements for their holiday event as well. The first of these achievements is called Shake Your Bunny Maker, which can only be earned during the holiday event of Noble Garden, which is something akin to a spring festival and Easter. To earn this achievement, players must collect brightly colored eggs in specific areas near certain cities to get Noble Garden chocolate. For 50 Noble Garden chocolates, spring flowers can be bought from Noble Garden vendors. Spring flowers have 16 charges, and players must use them to place bunny ears on all of the 12 races in the game as of Cataclysm. The only caveat is that the players have to be at least level 18, which is an obvious reference to 18 being the legal US age for all sorts of things. Shake Your Bunny Maker is required for the Noble Garden meta achievement, Noble Gardener. Up next is the achievement Check Your Head, the last achievement from the Hollow's End on this list. This achievement requires a player to use a weighted jack-o'-lantern on 12 different Cataclysm races. The achievement is slightly easier than some of the other ones on this entry since the weighted jack-o'-lanterns can be traded and sold to other players. While there are no vendors that you can buy weighted jack-o'-lanterns from, they do have a high chance to drop from candy buckets, Hollow and daily activities, and killing the Headless Horseman. Additionally, the weighted jack-o'-lanterns are available all year long and do not despawn once the Hollow's End event is over. This stylish pumpkin hat lasts for 1 hour, and when applied, the player can hear the Headless Horseman laughing. Check Your Head is required for the Hollow's End meta achievement, Hallowed Be Thy Name. The next 2 achievements are much harder than the last 2 in this entry, but are also very similar in nature. This is because these achievements require specific race and class combinations, as opposed to just 12 different races. The Fistful of Love achievement is from the holiday event Love is in the Air. This world event is the equivalent of Valentine's Day in WoW. For this achievement, the player must acquire a handful of rose petals and use them on 11 specific race and class combinations. These combinations are as follows: Gnome Warlock, Human Death Knight, Orc Shaman, Undead Warrior, Blood Elf Mage, Dwarf Hunter, Orc Death Knight, Night Elf Priest, Tauren Druid, Troll Rogue, and Draenei Paladin. The handful of rose petals can be purchased from a lovely merchant during the Love is in the Air world event for 5 rose petals for 2 love tokens. Love tokens can be acquired from the holiday dailies or can be purchased from any lovely merchant for 1 lovely charm bracelet each. Using the handful of rose petals is also required for the achievement named Flirt with Disaster. Both of these achievements are part of the meta achievements for Love is in the Air named Fool for Love. The bouquet of red roses generates the same effect as a handful of rose petals and can be used to complete the same achievements. While the bouquet of red roses does have a 5-minute cooldown, it has infinite uses. The handful of rose petals only has 5 uses, but it has a much shorter cooldown of 30 seconds. The final of these 4 achievements at number 6 is Let It Snow from the holiday event Feast of Wintervale. The Feast of Wintervale is a WoW amalgamation of Christmas and other seasonal holidays in December. This achievement requires the player to use a handful of snowflakes on each of the following race/class combinations: Orc Death Knight, Tauren Shaman, Undead Rogue, Gnome Mage, Blood Elf Warlock, Human Warrior, Night Elf Druid, Troll Hunter, Dwarf Paladin, and Draenei Priest. Let It Snow achievement was interestingly added in 2.3 before most achievements were added in Wrath of the Lich King. The achievement Let It Snow is also required for the Feast of Wintervale meta achievement Merrymaker. To acquire a handful of snowflakes, the player must simply type /kiss while targeting a Winter Reveler, who are located in most inns during the Feast of Wintervale. Winter Revelers will randomly give you a stack of 5 mistletoe, 5 fresh holly, or a handful of snowflakes, which contains 5 snowflakes after the player types /kiss at them. Only the Winter Revelers in the inns participate, and they must be standing under or near the mistletoe hanging from the ceiling. When the player receives one of these gifts, they will also receive a debuff preventing you from getting another one of these gifts for 1 hour. This hour is real time, so you can switch characters and come back an hour later. However, the snowflakes unfortunately cannot be mailed to alts. The shower snowflakes effect buff lasts for 2 minutes. As a side note, the snowflake effect is only an animation effect, and there is no direct numeric game effect for it. Snowflakes do expire and they will only last for 10 days. Finally, this achievement can only be done during Wintervale, because the player will not get credit for using snowflakes with the achievements targets outside of the holiday event. Since you'll be hunting for all these specific race and class combinations throughout the seasonal holidays, you really will have no other place to go, so let it snow. What makes these 4 achievements at number 6 so difficult are a variety of different factors. The first is a faction imbalance. Since many servers are home to a lopsided majority of players from their one faction, just going out in the world and finding players of the opposite faction may be quite difficult on some servers or shards. Of course, players can go to the other faction cities, but this requires stealth and trying as hard as possible not to be detected. Yet another option is queuing for arenas or battlegrounds to be able to spot and target the specific player requirements needed. But this brings all the disabilities of trying to PvP or avoid PvP while trying to earn the achievement. Dying too fast, wasting certain holiday resources like snowflakes, and other issues quickly become apparent when you try to earn the achievement this way. In fact, trying to PvP while doing holiday event achievements will make up most of this video from here on out. And at number 5, we have the achievement With a Little Helper from My Friends, which is an achievement that is also only available during the Feast of Wintervale. This achievement requires the player to get 50 honorable kills while under the festive gnome costume. This costume can be obtained from any of the PX239 Winter Wondervault found in around cities around Azeroth. The buff lasts for 30 minutes and turns the player into a stylish gnome with the flavor text reading Happy Holidays. This gnomifier allows players to be Santa's, Grandfather Winter's, little elves. Here's a barrage where every PX239 Winter Wondervault can be found from every Wintervale. Both Northrend and Legion Dalaran, Dunmer Row, just outside the gates of Ironforge, Orgrimmar, near the Flightmaster, Eversong Woods, just outside Silverwood City, the Exodar outside the eastern entrance, Shatrath across the eastern bridge, Stormwood City at the ramp to the Griffin Roost, Stranglethorn Vale on the docks of the Booty Bay, Tanaris just east of the Gadget Xan, Tearsful Glades just off the eastern Zeppelin Tower, and finally the Wetlands near the docks of Menethil Harbor. Alliance players will always have red outfits, and Horde players will always have green outfits, which seems a little counterintuitive since red is the Horde's faction color. If you really want to RP as a Christmas elf gnome for some reason, for 5 merry supplies, players can purchase little helpers from Izzy Hazelfizzle and add a PX239 Winter Wondervault to a level 3 WoD garrison. This enables access to the costume all year round and opens up being able to complete the achievement from beyond Feast of Wintervale. What makes this achievement so difficult is because of all the PvP and how one requires the buff. The easiest way to earn this achievement is to enter any battleground or arena with the buff up. In addition, the buff is only 30 minutes long, and time can pass quickly just waiting for queues. Dying removes the buff, and it can only be reapplied at the Winter Wondervaults. With a Little Helper for My Friends can be hard to achieve because the player must always have the buff up when they kill someone, which is far easier said than done. This means the player must not die at all if they want to keep the buff up for the entire duration of the arena or battleground. And while staying alive is an objective in PvP, it isn't necessarily an easy objective to complete. Luckily, honorable kills are pretty easy to get in modern WoW, since all player has to do is do any damage to a player that then dies. This will reward the player with some honor, but will only award you for credit for the achievement if you're still wearing the gnome costume. Finally, be warned that any form of shapeshifting, even done unintentionally, will also cancel the effect and buff. As such, druids and shamans will have the most difficult time earning this achievement, since it begins to limit gameplay mechanics and abilities for these classes. This achievement's name is an obvious reference to the Beatles song Named With a Little Help from My Friends, which came out in 1967. A Little Helper from My Friends is required achievement for the Feast of Wintervale meta achievement, which is named Merrymaker. Overall, this achievement can be quite frustrating and take a while. Any death in PvP will remove the costume, which makes getting any killing blows in the instance after that essentially worthless in terms of getting credit for the achievement. And with this achievement being a very heavy PvP requirement achievement, and PvP not being everyone's cup of tea, this can be especially hard for players to accomplish. And at number 4, we have the achievement Calavera from the micro-holiday Day of the Dead. This short holiday usually lasts for 1 to 2 days and always occurs right after Hollow's End. Day of the Dead is heavily inspired by the Mexican holiday of Dia de los Muertos, the name even being a direct translation. The Calavera achievement requires players to be wearing a contender's costume while they defeat or kill 50 other players who are also wearing one of the costumes. This achievement was added to WoW in the Warlords of Draenor expansion, but the holiday has been in the game since Wrath of the Lich King. To earn this achievement, a player must first purchase one of the 5 different contender costumes from Chapman. Chapman is an undead vendor who appears in most capital city graveyards only for the duration of Day of the Dead. Each of these costumes costs 100 gold, but they are also toys that bind to the player's account. Currently, there are the Night Demon, Purple Phantom, Blooming Rose, Snowy Owl, and Santos Sun contenders costumes. All of these costumes being toys makes it so players can use them to easily reapply the costume by placing the toy on their action bar. Needless to say, this achievement requires a lot of PvP. While it is very similar to the achievement with A Little Helper for My Friends, it differs in a few key ways. First, the player must duel or get a killing blow on another player while wearing the costume, rather than just anyone. Secondly, the PvP must be done in the open world since Blizzard removed being able to use the costumes in Battlegrounds in 2021 for some reason, which is very irritating. Luckily, there are a few ways in which Blizzard has made this achievement easier to get. There are currently 5 contender costumes which are all different toys. All grant 1 hour buffs and all have a cooldown of 1 minute. Calavera is actually the third out of this series of achievements. The first of these achievements is To the Afterlife, which requires a player to defeat 1 other contender with a costume on. The next achievement is Vientos, which requires players defeating 20 players who are also wearing the costume. The Calavera achievement is unique because it is the only achievement on the list to be featured in a much shorter holiday. Most holiday events last for several weeks, but Calavera can only be obtained for 2 days of the entire year. The easiest way to get this achievement is to form a group with other players outside the gates of Orgrimmar or Stormwind and take turns killing each other while everyone is wearing the costume. After dying and resurrecting, the other player can then reapply the buff to themselves and kill you. Then you can repeat this 49 more times. Don't forget to remove all your armor to get rid of inflated stats, especially health. All of this depends upon several factors, of course. First is finding fellow willing participants. Second is making sure there isn't any world PvP going on around you to disrupt or detract from your own killing. Third is simply the time and commitment required, which is a lot. This achievement is hard because not only are there always so few people doing this achievement, but you only have a day or 2 to actually do it. Additionally, the opposing faction also usually likes to invade cities during this time. So if you befriend, maybe consider farming this achievement far off in the open world in a dead zone so you don't have to worry about other players in war mode. Of course, war mode is completely optional. You can get the achievement by just winning 50 duels, but you're much more likely to find PvP players when you're in war mode where they actually do PvP. This achievement is a niche achievement in a niche environment, in a niche player base and style, in a niche time frame, so it makes sense grind for this achievement is fairly difficult. And at number 3, we have the achievement School of Hard Knocks. This achievement is from the holiday event Children's Week, which usually runs through early to mid-May. On a somewhat interesting note, this is the only holiday event to not really have an equivalent in the real world. The requirements of the achievement state, take your orphan into a battleground and complete the feats listed below. Capture the flag in Eye of the Storm, assault a flag in Arathi Basin, assault a tower in Alterac Valley, and return a fallen flag in Warsong Gulch. This achievement is considered one of the hardest to get in the game, and for good reason. First, the player must start a Children's Week questline by adopting a child at various orphanages around Azeroth and Outland. Once they've adopted the child, the player will receive a whistle which they can use to summon their new companion. The player must then queue for 4 specific battlegrounds, which greatly increase wait times and hampers rewards for completing them. During the actual battleground, players must have the orphan summoned when doing the activity. Dying will cause the orphan to despawn as well. This means players must remember to resummon the orphan every time they die. In addition to the regular mechanics of competing in a battleground, you must also compete against other players trying to earn the same achievement. Since the School of Hard Knocks can only be earned during Children's Week, this means other players will be trying to do the exact same thing you are doing. This isn't including the opposing faction, but your own faction as well. This often means racing to achieve a specific requirement before anyone else can in the battleground. And all of the requirements can only be done a certain number of times per battleground as well. Capturing a flag in Eye of the Storm must mean the player and their orphan survive a bloodbath to get the flag, successfully grab it, and then bring it back to the tower their faction controls to capture the flag. Assaulting a flag in Alterac Valley is somewhat harder, since there is usually only one flag that is not immediately contended when the battleground starts. This flag is the stables for Alliance and the farm for Horde. Assaulting a tower in Altaric Valley is by far the hardest requirement since it requires the player and the orphan to not only stay alive and slip inside an enemy tower, but also capture the tower's flag and not be killed by other players or NPCs while doing so. Returning a fallen flag in Warsong Gulch means killing a player of the opposing faction who's carrying your team's flag. When that player dies, the flag will drop to the ground, and clicking on the flag will return it to your stronghold. It's recommended to keep the quest whistle to summon your orphan on your action bar so you can see it frequently. Remember to summon your orphan every time you die, otherwise you won't receive any credit. This achievement was so hard that Blizzard eventually removed the School of Hard Knocks from the Children's Week holiday event meta achievement for the children in 2022. And at number 2 is the achievement Turkey Lurkey. This achievement is only available during Pilgrim's Bounty, which is akin to the American Thanksgiving holiday and falls around the same time period in late November. This achievement is similar to the number 6 achievement, but for this achievement the player must use a seasonal item on 10 rogues, each of different races. Each rogue must be a member from all of the 10 different races of Cataclysm when the achievement was last updated. That is, a player must find and Turkify a Night Elf rogue, Dwarf rogue, Gnome rogue, Human rogue, Goblin rogue, Blood Elf rogue, Orc rogue, Troll rogue, Undead rogue, and Worgen rogue. The consumable item the player uses to get the achievement is called a Turkey Shooter. When the player uses a Turkey Shooter on a rogue, it transforms the rogue into a turkey for 1 hour. The buff the rogue receives is called Turkey Feathers, and if it leaves the rogue in a foul mood, they can simply right-click it off to remove the effect. To complicate matters, Turkey Shooters only come from Pilgrim Bounty dailies and have 1 use. Additionally, the cast time of Turkey Shooter is 3 seconds, which is plenty long enough for your target to move too far away or vanish suddenly. The Turkey Shooter can also be interrupted by damage and interrupting abilities. In WoD, the Turkey Shooters were added to the Pilgrim Bounty's bag. These bags are awarded for doing one of Pilgrim Bounty's dailies and have 100% chance to drop 1 Turkey Shooter. Prior to Warlords of Draenor, the Turkey Shooter itself was only rewarded from the dailies. The Pilgrim's Bounty bag can also drop a frightened brushed chicken pet and a toy as well. The toy is named the Silver-Plated Turkey Shooter and can also be used to earn the achievement Turkey Lurkey. Both the pet and toy have a 3% chance to drop from the bag. The Silver-Plated Turkey Shooters also have a cast time of 3 seconds, and while it does have a 5-minute cooldown, it also has an infinite number of uses, making it quite handy for farming for the achievement rather than having to do a quest for one of the disposable regular Turkey Shooters. One final note of the Turkey Shooter items that disappears from the player's inventory when the Pilgrim Bounty event has ended. While we've covered various difficulties and obstacles related to targeting and using seasonal items and other players, this achievement is particularly hard because rogues themselves are such a small group of players. When was the last time you actually saw a dwarf rogue, for example? Theoretically, this achievement is harder than ever before because each new race and allied race added to the game means there are fewer specific rogues and class combinations online at any given time. Additionally, 3 new classes have been added to the game since Cataclysm, which are the Monk, Drakthir, and the Demon Hunter. This also means that technically less people will probably be playing rogues because they switched over to the new classes. Even if you find a rogue, it doesn't mean it will be in one of the 10 required classes anyway, since 2 new races and allied races have been added to the game since Cataclysm, most of which can also be rogues. Finally, Evokers with Dragonflight further makes this achievement all the much harder to get. With Evokers, the chance of theoretically finding a rogue decreases to 1 out of 13. And with all races being able to play a rogue in Dragonflight, in the future, any given rogue you see will only have a slightly higher than 50% chance to be one of the specific races from Cataclysm you need for the achievement. And if I did my math right, this means that in Dragonflight, any given player will theoretically be the specific one you need for the achievement 0.5% of the time. The easiest way to earn this achievement is to go to max level neutral city zones for the current expansion and use macros to target specific rogue players. Trying to spot rogues in PvP and battlegrounds and arenas can be quite difficult, especially since rogues like to use stealth and vanish. Turkey Lurkey is by far one of the hardest achievements just because of the statistics to find the required players, with it arguably harder to accomplish every year. Turkey Lurkey is still required for the meta achievement Pilgrim for the Pilgrim's Bounty. Perhaps Blizzard should look at changing the requirements in the future for this achievement to something much more easier, like use a Turkey Shooter on any 12 rogues of different races. And finally, at number 1, we have the achievement, They Really Love Me. This achievement can only be earned during the holiday event Love is in the Air. At the beginning of Warlords of Draenor, when the achievement was introduced, They Really Love Me required the player to be simultaneously the target of 50 other players' manufactured love prisms. An important note is that each manufactured love prism only has 50 charges. One manufactured love prism can be bought for 40 love tokens, which are the currency for Love is in the Air vendors. When the manufactured love prism was added in 6.0, it had a 1-minute cooldown and the buffer provided only lasted for 10 seconds. The name of this buff is called Love Ray, and its flavor text reads, Someone Likes Me. This achievement is actually the third in a series of achievements. The first achievement is called Love Magnet and requires 10 Love Rays on a player. The next achievement is called Beacon of Love and requires 20 Love Rays. And the third and final achievement is They Really Love Me, which requires 50 Love Rays. Luckily in 6.2, the manufactured love prism was changed considerably. Its new cooldown was 30 seconds, and the buffer provided was now for 5 minutes, which is much longer than the original 10 seconds. In order to get the achievement, a player must theoretically form a raid group and have 50 people clicking their manufactured love prism within 10 seconds while targeting the player. There are some ways to cheese the actual number of players required when you include the various buff durations and players alternating applying the buffs to keep it refreshed, but the math is starting to get kinda complicated to talk about for a simple top 10 video. Since 6.2, there is much more room for variation in how to obtain this achievement. If the player brings one friend along with a fully 50 charge manufactured lead prism and refreshes the buff every time the cooldown ends, every 30 seconds, it will in theory take exactly 25 minutes for the player to get the achievement. The way this works is because a love ray buff persists for 5 minutes and it gets refreshed with another stack every 30 seconds. Every additional player has this time. If a player was in a group of 5, including themselves, and all 4 of the players were constantly keeping the buff up, it would take 6.5 minutes. If a player was in a raid with 25 other people, it would take 1 minute. Of course, this requires every player being perfectly accurate and having enough charges and manufactured lead prism. Overall, this is at number 1 because it used to be incredibly hard to get when it was first introduced, and still requires a lot of coordination with other players in order to get it even today. Although many could argue that School of Hard Knocks should definitely be number 1 instead. Alright, and that's it for this very long video. Now, there are a ton of achievements that could have been on this list. In fact, there's so many that we can't even list them all in our reasonings for not including them, since that would make this video even longer than it already is. We will, however, briefly mention some honorable mentions. These include 50 Coins of Ancestry, the Lunar Festival Elder Achievements, Spring Fling, Desert Rose, Torch Juggler, Pilgrim's Peril, A Caroling We Will Go, and finally BB King. We didn't include the meta achievements for what a long strange trip it's been for obvious reasons. Finally, technically you get achievement for a feat of strength when you obtain the Headless Horse's mount or a Brewfest mount, but we didn't include those either.